Hey everyone, and welcome to Paranormal M. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please give the video a like. And if you've ever had a paranormal experience you can't explain, feel free to send it to me. Our first story is from an irrigation technician who went to a customer's home for a routine repair. The house seemed unusual, but things became much stranger once he entered the crawl space. What he saw there stayed with him for more than 20 years. And still appears in his nightmares. Let's begin with his story. I hope you sleep well tonight. Let me tell you about something that happened to me more than 20 years ago. Even now, I can remember every detail with uncomfortable clarity. At the time, I was working as an irrigation service technician. I had recently moved up from installation work, so I was eager to prove that I could handle difficult jobs on my own. One afternoon, I was sent to a new customer's house to replace a damaged valve, rebuild part of the water line, and install a backflow device. The property looked completely ordinary. It was a modest home in a working-class neighborhood, sitting on a large, quiet lot. The first unusual thing I noticed was a small sticker in the corner of the front window. It showed a goat's head surrounded by a 5-pointed symbol. I remember thinking it was probably there to discourage salespeople from knocking. A woman named Mara answered the door. She was short, with bright auburn hair, and looked to be around 60. She seemed a little nervous, but I met all kinds of personalities through my work, so I tried not to read too much into it. Inside, however, the house felt different. There was a large stuffed bear standing upright in the living room. Strange paintings covered the walls, and small animal skulls had been arranged on the end tables like decorations. They looked like they might have belonged to raccoons or possums. Mara led me downstairs. At the bottom of the steps stood what appeared to be a taxidermied wolf. It was enormous, but someone had attached the horned head of a goat or ram to its body. The work was crude, almost deliberately unsettling. The basement walls had been painted black. Gold symbols were scattered across them, along with dark, abstract paintings. I did not recognize any of it, but the entire room had a heavy, unpleasant atmosphere. The crawlspace entrance was located inside a small utility room. I told Mara that I needed to crawl beneath the house, locate the water meter, inspect the damaged pipe, and make a list of the parts I would need. The repair area was on the opposite side of the house, so I wanted to avoid making unnecessary trips. The crawlspace was narrow and filthy. I moved across the dirt on my hands and knees, squeezing under air ducts and climbing over sewer pipes. Loose wires hung everywhere. It took me nearly 10 minutes to reach the water line. After inspecting the pipe, I wrote down the fittings and tools I would need. Then I turned around. Mara was right behind me. Her face was only inches from mine. I had not heard her enter. I had not heard her crawling toward me. Nothing. And I had looked behind myself several times while moving through the space, partly so I could remember the easiest route back. Before I could say anything, she began firing questions at me. How much would everything cost? Why did I need copper pipe? Was all this work really necessary? Her voice was fast and frantic. I answered as calmly as I could while backing away from her. Then I crawled out of there much faster than I had gone in. Once I reached my truck, I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes. I gathered my tools, took several deep breaths, and tried to convince myself that the encounter had only startled me. When I returned to the house, the atmosphere had changed. The moment I stepped inside, my stomach turned. A pounding headache appeared almost instantly. I told Mara that I would be under the house for about an hour, and that she should stay out because I would be using materials that could produce irritating fumes. That was not entirely untrue, but mostly I wanted to make sure she did not follow me again. I crawled back to the repair area, spread out a tarp, and organized my tools. Even though I still felt ill, I started working. About halfway through the repair, I noticed movement near the crawl space opening on the other side of the house. Mara was watching me through the opening. She did not call my name or ask a question. She simply lowered herself onto the dirt and crawled inside. A few moments later, she disappeared into the darkness. I froze. My flashlight only illuminated a short stretch of the crawl space. Beyond that, everything dissolved into shadow. I wanted to call out to her, but my voice would not come. Then something moved above me. A figure emerged from the darkness, clinging upside down to the wooden floor beams. It was not shaped like a person. Its limbs bent at unnatural angles as it crawled toward me across the ceiling of the crawl space. It made no sound at all. I could not move. I could barely breathe. When it came within several yards of me, it dropped from the beams. The moment it touched the dirt, it seemed to sink straight into the ground and vanish. That broke whatever hold fear had on me. I had completed enough of the repair to restore water to the house, but I was nowhere near finished. I did not care. I packed what I could carry and crawled toward the exit. When I climbed out and hurried up the basement stairs, Mara was waiting at the top. She followed me toward the door, talking rapidly. Every time I turned to leave, she grabbed my arms as though she were trying to keep me inside. She appeared frightened, almost desperate. I apologized for leaving the job unfinished, but I did not stop walking. By the time I reached my truck, she was crying and calling after me. I drove away without looking back. I thought the worst consequence would be explaining myself to my supervisor. I was wrong. 2 nights later, just as I was falling asleep, the same terror returned. It was unmistakable, the exact feeling I had experienced beneath that house. Then I saw the goat's head from the window sticker. It was not a normal dream. The image appeared in my mind with such sharpness that it felt as though someone had placed it directly in front of my eyes. I stayed awake until morning. After that, the image kept returning. Sometimes it appeared as I was drifting off. Other times it came with nightmares in which I was trapped beneath the house, crawling through darkness while something followed me along the beams. I also dreamed about Mara. In those dreams, she was always trying to stop me from leaving. The nightmares became less frequent as the years passed, but they never completely disappeared. Even now, decades later, I occasionally wake with that same crushing fear and the feeling that something is standing just beyond where I can see. I cannot prove that Mara did anything to me. I cannot explain what I saw beneath her house. All I know is that I entered that crawl space alone, and when I left, it felt as though something came with me. I grew up on a small Pacific island, and superstition was simply part of everyday life, especially among the older people in our family. They taught us that certain warnings should never be ignored, even when we did not completely understand the reason behind them. Some people go their entire lives without experiencing anything strange or unexplainable. Honestly, I think that can be a blessing. In my family, though, several of us have experienced things we could never quite explain. For me, everything became much more intense when I found out I was expecting my first child. At the time, my husband and I were living in a little apartment near the edge of a thick, overgrown forest. When I first moved in, the place never bothered me. It felt ordinary. Nothing about it seemed frightening or unusual. But once I became pregnant, the atmosphere began to change. It started with loud knocking on our front door. Sometimes the doorknob would shake as though someone were trying to come inside. Every time it happened, I would look through the window or open the door, but no one was ever there. As the weeks passed, the apartment began to feel heavier. That is the only way I can describe it. The rooms no longer felt peaceful, even during the daytime. Growing up, I had occasionally heard unexplained sounds or noticed unusual smells. In our religious tradition, the sudden scent of roses could mean that a spirit was nearby. Before my pregnancy, those experiences had always been subtle. I had never actually seen anything. Being pregnant seemed to amplify everything. The activity became worse whenever my husband worked late. He worked security at a nightclub, so I was often alone until the early hours of the morning. One night, we rearranged the bed so that we could see directly into the kitchen. From where I was lying, I had a clear view of the window above the sink. That night, I woke up and saw a man standing in the kitchen. He was completely dark, almost like a solid shadow, but I could clearly make out the shape of a man. He did not move. He simply stood there, facing us. I woke my husband, and the moment he turned on the light, the figure disappeared. After that, my young nephew began reacting to something in the second bedroom. I already avoided that room because it always felt colder and more unsettling than the rest of the apartment. My nephew would stare into the room, laugh, and speak as though someone were standing there with him. Later, my sister told me that he had asked her, "Who is that man?" That was when we realized we were probably all sensing the same presence. A little while later, we rescued a small puppy. By the time I was around 6 months pregnant, the puppy had become my constant companion. Whenever my husband left for work, I would lock myself in the bedroom with the puppy, turn on every light, and leave the television playing so the apartment would not feel so silent. One night, the puppy suddenly sat upright at the end of the bed. He stared at the bedroom door and began to growl. Then I saw a shadow moving underneath the door. It paced slowly from one side to the other, over and over again, as though someone were walking back and forth in the hallway. I knew no one else was inside the apartment. That was my breaking point. I called my mother and grandmother and told them everything. They brought blessed palm leaves to the apartment, burned them in each room, and prayed throughout the home. Afterward, the difference was immediate. The apartment felt lighter. The pressure seemed to lift, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling as though someone were watching me. Those months were some of the most frightening of my life. It was not only adults who felt something strange there. Children who visited would describe seeing a frightening man or a monster in the apartment. Before becoming pregnant, I had only heard things or noticed strange scents. I had never seen a figure with my own eyes. After my pregnancy began, it felt as though a door had opened and everything on the other side suddenly became visible. I would never wish that experience on anyone, especially someone carrying a baby and spending most nights alone. People often say that you should simply ignore these things. I tried doing that. I repeated to myself that nothing was there and that I should stop being afraid. But the more I ignored it, the worse it became. I was not a deeply religious person at the time, and I still do not automatically believe every supernatural story I hear. But I have always respected the traditions and warnings passed down through my culture. When the elders tell you not to do something, there is usually a reason. I still do not know why certain people experience these things while others never do. I only know what happened in that apartment, and I know how different the home felt after my family came to pray. Some experiences are difficult to prove, but when you have lived through one, you never forget how it made you feel. I've always had vivid dreams, and sometimes I know I'm dreaming while it's happening. That night started the same way. I was wandering through some strange, half-formed place that made perfect sense inside the dream, even though I couldn't describe it now. Then, I began hearing something in the background. It sounded like tiny footsteps moving quickly across the floor, a soft, uneven tapping. At first, I ignored it because I didn't want to lose the dream. But the noise kept returning. It would stop for a moment, then begin again. Eventually, I focused on it. That was when I realized the sound wasn't part of the dream. It was coming from outside the bedroom. The realization pulled me into awareness. I could see the room clearly, including the pale light coming through the curtains. My partner was asleep beside me, facing away from the door, while the footsteps continued somewhere in the hallway. I tried to turn toward him. "Can you hear that?" I whispered. "Wake up. Please wake up." He shifted slightly and murmured that he couldn't hear anything. Then he settled back into sleep. But something about that exchange felt wrong. A few moments later, I understood why. I hadn't actually moved. My lips hadn't spoken. My body was still lying completely motionless beneath the blankets. I was conscious, but I was trapped inside REM sleep. It was sleep paralysis. I'd experienced it before, but never quite like this. Usually, it felt like being awake inside a body that had temporarily forgotten how to respond. This time, it felt as though my awareness had separated from me and was hovering just beneath the surface of the physical world. And somehow, I knew that whatever was making the sound had noticed me. It knew I was awake. The footsteps stopped. Then, the presence began moving closer. I didn't hear it in the ordinary sense. Instead, a deep vibration started building inside my ears and behind my eyes. It came in slow, powerful waves. Vroom, vroom. Each pulse grew louder until it seemed to fill my entire head. The energy was overwhelming, but strangely, I didn't feel that it was evil. I was frightened because I didn't understand it. Yet beneath that fear was an intense curiosity. Near the bedroom door, the air began to distort. I could see the outline of a person, but there was no face, clothing, or solid body. It looked like a figure made from bright static, almost transparent, but charged with electricity. The space around it shimmered, as though the room itself was bending to make space for it. Its presence was enormous. It wasn't simply standing inside the room. For a moment, it felt as though it had become the room. Its energy surrounded me and pressed against my awareness, pulling at my consciousness. I tried to hold on to myself. The feeling reminded me of struggling against a powerful current, fighting to keep my head above water while the waves dragged me farther from shore. I didn't know whether the presence was attacking me, examining me, or simply trying to communicate. Whatever it was doing, it became too much. So, I stopped resisting. I closed my eyes, or at least I believed I did, and focused on breathing. Relax. Breathe. Let go. Instead of fighting the presence, I filled my mind with acceptance. I tried to communicate without words, using only my feelings. I'm not afraid of you. I won't hurt you. You can leave, or you can stay. I accept what is happening. As soon as I released my fear, my attention slipped away from the figure. Then, I woke up. Not gradually. I returned to my body all at once. I could move again. The room looked ordinary, and the strange vibration had disappeared. The experience left me with an unsettling thought. Maybe becoming unconscious inside that other state was what brought me back into the physical world. Maybe what we call waking up is actually the moment our deeper senses switch off. The presence might have remained in the room after I woke. I simply couldn't detect it anymore. Sometimes I wonder whether we pass by things like that every day without realizing it. Perhaps certain people sense them more easily because some inner door has been left slightly open. And perhaps, to those unseen beings, most of us are little more than sleeping figures moving through the world. But when one person finally becomes aware of them, they are drawn closer. Not because they want to frighten us. Maybe they're simply responding to the quiet recognition. You can see me. I still don't know what visited me that night. A spirit, a jinn, an angel, an alien presence, or something the human mind cannot properly translate. Before that experience, I was skeptical of stories like these. Now, I'm not so certain. Maybe the old legends are not complete truths, but fragments. Brief encounters carried through generations, reshaped into stories so that the unknown can be remembered. Whatever I saw remains a mystery, but for those few moments, it felt more real than any dream I have ever had. I'll be honest with you, I don't know whether ghosts are real. I don't know what they are, why they appear, or what might cause these strange experiences. But I do believe there is something out there that we don't fully understand. I say that because I've seen and heard things myself. People I trust have experienced similar things too, sometimes without knowing anyone else had noticed anything unusual in the same place. That's what gets to me. When completely unrelated people describe the same feeling or the same kind of event without being influenced by one another, it starts to feel like more than coincidence. One experience happened when I was with 4 other people. 3 of us were completely sober, and none of us were frightened or talking about ghosts. The supernatural wasn't even on our minds. We were near an old cemetery late one evening when we noticed several small lights moving between the trees and headstones. They didn't behave like flashlights, insects, or reflections. They drifted slowly, stopped, and then changed direction in ways that didn't make sense. All 5 of us saw them. At the time, I had no idea that the cemetery had a reputation for strange activity. Years later, I happened to watch a paranormal television show where investigators captured what they called orbs. What they showed looked almost exactly like the lights we had seen. That made me curious, so I searched for information about the cemetery. That was when I discovered people had been reporting unusual sightings there for decades. None of us knew that on the night we visited. I've had smaller experiences too. Once, I played back a video I had recorded at home and heard a faint voice in the background. It sounded like someone quietly saying a few words, but nobody else had been in the room. Another time, I saw the shadow of a cat moving across my wall. I didn't own a cat, and there was nothing in the room that could have created that shape. I spent a long time trying to reproduce the shadow using the lamps and windows, but I couldn't do it. I've also seen framed pictures and lightweight objects suddenly come off walls. They didn't simply slide down. They seemed to move outward first, almost as though someone had pushed them. One of my earliest memories happened when I was a child. The electronics in our apartment started behaving strangely. A radio would switch on by itself. Lights flickered even after bulbs had been replaced. One night, a small television turned on after it had been unplugged. Years later, I learned that someone had died violently in that apartment before my family lived there. Maybe that was connected. Maybe it wasn't. That's the difficult part. I can't prove what any of it means. For a long time, I assumed people who told paranormal stories were exaggerating, misremembering things, or letting fear take over. And honestly, I still think that happens sometimes. The mind is powerful. It can create patterns, fill in missing details, and convince us that something happened differently than it really did. But I also know the difference between imagining something and witnessing something clearly. These experiences didn't happen when I was panicking or searching for signs. Most of them happened during ordinary moments, when I wasn't expecting anything unusual at all. Some were witnessed by several people at the same time. That's why I can't dismiss them. Maybe what we call ghosts has something to do with energy. People often say energy doesn't simply disappear, so perhaps some part of a person leaves an impression behind. Or maybe it has something to do with other dimensions existing alongside our own. I don't understand the science well enough to claim that as an explanation, but I think it's possible that we occasionally catch glimpses of something that normally remains hidden from us. I'm not claiming to have the answer. I'm only saying that I've experienced things I cannot explain, and those moments changed how I see the world. Before they happened, I was certain there was nothing beyond what we could see and measure. Now, I'm not so certain. And sometimes, admitting that you don't know is the most honest answer you can give. This happened a few years ago, in 2019. My wife and I had just gotten home after picking up our little one from daycare. It was an ordinary evening. We were both tired, the baby was hungry, and the kitchen had become that familiar kind of controlled chaos. My wife was feeding the baby while I started putting dinner together. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my wife, but not a normal typed message. It was one of those handwritten iPhone messages, written in looping cursive. It said, "Bloom, pop." I stared at it for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I looked over at my wife and asked, "What does this mean?" She looked completely confused. Her phone was sitting several feet away on the kitchen counter. She was holding the baby with both hands and hadn't gone near it. We walked over to the phone together. The screen was still awake, and our conversation was open. There it was, the handwritten message already sent. A few seconds later, another message appeared. It was just a jumble of letters, something like QXA, which looked much more like the kind of accidental text a phone might send. But that first message was different. To create a handwritten message on an iPhone, you normally have to turn the phone sideways and open the handwriting screen. My wife may have placed the phone horizontally when she set it down, but that still didn't explain how the words had been written and sent. Neither of us had touched it. Nothing had fallen on it. The counter hadn't moved. The baby was nowhere near it. I knew the handwriting feature included a few ready-made phrases, things like, "Thank you," "Congratulations," and "Happy birthday." It also saved handwritten messages that had been created before. But "bloom," "pop," wasn't one of the standard phrases. Even stranger, my wife said she had never used the handwriting feature in her life. Later that night, I picked up her phone and turned it sideways to look through the recent handwritten messages. "Bloom," "pop" appeared twice, and between the two copies was the phrase, "Happy birthday." That made the whole thing feel even more personal. My wife's birthday was coming up the following week, and my first thought was her late father. The children had always called him Papa, so Pop felt close enough to make me wonder. I asked my wife whether anyone had ever called him that, but she said she couldn't remember anyone doing so. Still, we had experienced a few unusual things since his passing. Small coincidences, familiar signs, moments that made us wonder whether he was somehow letting the family know he was still around. So I asked her, "Do you think your dad could be wishing you a happy birthday?" She didn't know what to say. I sent a screenshot to her youngest sister, who had often spoken about sensing relatives who had passed away. She had even described experiences involving their father. Her response gave me chills. She said she had been noticing signs connected to him throughout that very day. To her, the message felt like it could have come from him. Of course, there were other possible explanations. My wife's mother was planning to send flowers for her birthday, so maybe "bloom, pop" was somehow connected to the arrangement that would soon arrive. Then my wife's older sister looked at the screenshot and offered another possibility. She said the handwriting reminded her of their late grandmother, Patrina. Grandma Patrina had been a devoted gardener. Her garden was always perfectly arranged. every plant cared for with almost military precision. When my wife and her sisters were children, they used to sneak around popping open the tightly closed fuchsia buds before they were ready to bloom. Grandma Petrina absolutely hated when they did that. So perhaps bloom, pop, was referring to that little childhood memory, popping flowers in their grandmother's garden. It seemed like such a strange and specific thing to communicate, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes the smallest memories are the ones only family would understand. To this day, we don't know what happened. Maybe it was an unusual touchscreen malfunction. Maybe the phone somehow activated a saved message that none of us knew existed. Or maybe, just for a moment, someone found a way to reach through the silence and send a birthday greeting. What stays with me most is that it wasn't simply a random typed message. It was handwritten. And according to my wife, it was written by no one in the room. Back in 2021, two friends and I took a girls' trip to Salem, Massachusetts. We rented an Airbnb near Essex Street, right in the heart of everything. I originally thought the house had been built in the 1700s, but I later learned I had mixed it up with the neighboring property. The home we stayed in was actually built sometime around 1850, which, honestly, was still old enough to have plenty of history tucked inside its walls. Our apartment was on the second floor. When you entered, you stepped directly into the living room. To the right was the larger bedroom overlooking the street, and to the left was the kitchen. A narrow hallway led past the bathroom to a smaller bedroom at the very end. The bathroom and bedroom doors were so close together that they almost touched. My friend Anna chose the front bedroom, even though she immediately said she could sense a woman standing nearby, watching us with what she described as a deeply disapproving expression. I felt her too. There was definitely a presence in the house, but I decided not to focus on it. This was my first trip to Salem, and I had every intention of enjoying myself. I took the smaller bedroom at the end of the hallway. Our other friend, Beth, claimed the living room couch because she insisted she always slept better on couches. The first 2 nights were completely uneventful. On the third evening, we decided to conduct a short paranormal investigation. Nothing dramatic, just an hour of respectful communication to see whether anyone in the house wanted to speak with us. The woman Anna had sensed on the first day came through, almost immediately. From what we gathered, she had been the wife of a sea captain and one of the home's early residents. She seemed frustrated by the constant stream of strangers moving through what she still considered her house. She was also extremely religious and strongly disapproved of witches being under her roof. That was slightly awkward, considering all 3 of us practiced witchcraft. Strangely enough, she did not seem bothered by the fact that we were communicating with the dead. She actively participated in the session and answered several of our questions. When we finished, we thanked her for speaking with us and for trusting us enough to communicate. We closed the session properly, and everything seemed calm. At least, that was what we thought. I have a habit of checking the time whenever I wake during the night. I will look at my phone, become mildly irritated that I am awake, and then immediately go back to sleep. Sometime that night, I woke to the sound of Anna and Beth giggling in the living room. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It was 3:23 in the morning. A moment later, I heard them giggle again. I rolled onto my other side and noticed that both the hallway light and the bathroom light were on. My bedroom door was open, and the light outside was so bright that it filled the entire room. My first thought was, why did they leave every light on? My second thought was, are they doing another investigation without me? I stayed quiet, staring through the doorway. I wondered whether I should get up and see what they were doing. Part of me felt a little left out, but then the giggling stopped. I remember thinking, they're fine. If they need me, they'll come get me. So I rolled over, turned away from the light, and went back to sleep. I was actually smiling because I thought my friends were having a wonderful time together. Around 6 that morning, I sat up in bed and started scrolling through social media on my phone. A few minutes later, Beth appeared in my doorway. She did not say anything at first. When I finally looked up, I could tell something was wrong. She looked exhausted, pale, and completely shaken. Then she asked, very quietly, "Did you hear anything last night?" I immediately smiled and told her everything. I told her I had awakened at 3:23. I told her I had heard her and Anna laughing in the living room. I mentioned how strange it was that the bathroom and hallway lights had been left on. I even joked that I had almost gotten up because I was afraid I was missing out on something fun. Beth's expression changed completely. She stared at me and said, "That isn't what happened." I climbed out of bed, made a cup of coffee, and joined them in the living room. Then they told me their version of the night. Beth had been asleep on the couch when she woke to the sound of Anna mumbling loudly from the front bedroom. The bedroom door was open. According to Beth, every light in the apartment was off. She walked to the bedroom and saw Anna lying in bed with one leg stretched out from beneath the blankets and hanging over the side. Anna kept mumbling something that sounded like, "Help me." Beth tried calling her name. Anna did not respond. She remained in the same position and repeated, "Help me." Beth panicked. The first thing that came into her mind was the Lord's Prayer, so she began reciting it aloud. Suddenly, Anna sat straight up in bed, gasping for air. She told Beth that the woman from our investigation had been trying to drag her out of the bed. Terrified, the two of them moved into the living room and sat together on the couch. They did not laugh. They barely spoke at all. When they did speak, they whispered. And neither of them turned on a single light. I remember sitting there with my coffee, trying to make sense of what they were telling me. It felt impossible. I knew what I had heard. I had heard two women giggling in the living room. I knew what I had seen. The hallway and bathroom had been brightly lit. The light was so strong that I had even wondered whether the kitchen light was on too. Then I asked Beth what time everything had happened. She said it had been around 3:30 in the morning. That was when my stomach dropped. I asked why they had not awakened me. They looked at each other and admitted that they had discussed the same thing that morning. Neither of them could explain why waking me had never crossed their minds, even though they had both been terrified and knew I was only a few steps away. The three of us eventually came to the same unsettling conclusion. Whatever was in that house had altered what I experienced. While my friends were frightened and needed help, I heard laughter. While they sat in darkness, I saw bright lights. I was given a completely different version of the room around me, one convincing enough to make me roll over and return to sleep. Even now, I struggle to understand how something could manipulate an environment so completely. Before that night, stories about spirits distorting space, sound, or time had always felt like something from a movie. I never completely dismissed those accounts, but I treated them cautiously because I had no way to prove them. After Salem, I stopped doubting quite so quickly. Would I stay in that house again? No, not because I am afraid to return, but because the woman made one thing perfectly clear. We were not welcome in her home. And out of respect for that message, I will never book that Airbnb again. You know, there's this little bar I stop by every now and then, usually when the mood catches me. I wouldn't call myself a regular exactly, but in a town as small as ours, everybody feels like a regular eventually. You recognize the faces, you know who grew up with whom, and you've heard at least 3 different versions of everyone's business. One night, pretty late, A woman named Dana came through the door. I'd known her since elementary school. We weren't especially close, but we had history, and history counts for something around here. She was clearly upset. Now, I'd already had a few drinks, and I'll be honest with you, Dana was an attractive woman. My first thought was to offer her a drink, and my reasons weren't entirely noble. Then I noticed her hands trembling. Just a little. And that thought disappeared immediately. She didn't need somebody flirting with her. She needed a friend. So I sat down on the stool beside her and asked how she was doing. Asked about her mother, her family, all the ordinary things you ask when you're giving somebody room to decide whether they want to tell you the truth. She smiled, but it wasn't real. Then she turned her head and wiped at her eyes before the tears could reach her cheeks. I pretended not to notice. Sometimes that's the kindest thing you can do. At first, I figured it had something to do with her ex-husband. Nobody in town had much patience for that man. But Dana didn't mention him. After a few minutes, I told her I was stepping outside for a little fresh air and asked whether she wanted to join me. She hesitated, then nodded. We took our drinks out back and sat at the old picnic table behind the bar. After we'd been there a while, I gently asked what was wrong. I could tell she didn't want to think about it anymore. That was probably why she'd come to the bar in the first place, to stop thinking. But eventually, she told me. It wasn't her ex. And sometimes I think I would have preferred it if it had been. It was about her daughter, Aster. Aster was only 5 at the time. Dana had recently moved into a smaller house outside town. Money was tight after the divorce, and she didn't need the big family home anymore. The new place sat at the end of a gravel road, just beyond an abandoned church that had already been falling apart when Dana and I were children. Soon after moving in, Aster started talking to someone who wasn't there. An imaginary friend. At least, that's what Dana assumed. I told her that children did things like that all the time. They invent friends, hold tea parties, whisper to empty corners. It didn't necessarily mean anything was wrong. Dana nodded, but I could see she was holding something back. More than that, I could see she was frightened. We were about to head inside when she quietly said, "He tells her to hurt herself." I stopped walking. Dana looked at me, and whatever had been holding her together finally gave way. She told me everything. At first, the imaginary friend had seemed harmless. Aster played games with him, set a place for him at the table, talked to him while she arranged her dolls. Then, she burned her hand on the stove. A few days later, she came inside with deep scratches on her arms. Every time Dana asked what had happened, Aster blamed the boy. Sometimes she said he had caused it. Other times, she said he had told her to do it herself. Dana ordered her to stop pretending, told her there was no boy and that the games had gone too far. Aster broke down crying. She kept insisting he was real. After that, strange things began happening around the house. Doors opened when nobody was near them. Toys appeared in rooms where Aster hadn't been playing. Dana sometimes heard footsteps in the hallway after her daughter was asleep. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and prove, just enough to plant doubt. I did what any friend would do. I told her everything would be all right, though I had no idea whether that was true. Then she showed me a photograph of Aster's latest injury. The poor kid had needed stitches. I remember feeling angry. I didn't care whether this thing was imaginary, human, or something else entirely. Anything that hurt a child deserved to be dealt with. Dana stared down at her drink and said, "It's the house. We have to leave. I just don't know how." I understood what she meant. She couldn't afford another move, and I wasn't in much better shape financially. I could lend her my truck, maybe help carry furniture, but that was about it. Neither of us said the word ghost. There didn't seem to be any reason to. The injuries were real. Dana's fear was real. That was enough. I was trying to think of something comforting to say when a voice behind us nearly made us jump out of our skin. I might be able to help. The man standing there was Nolan. I knew him, though I wouldn't have called us friends. Truthfully, I couldn't stand him. He came from a wealthy family and had always carried himself like he knew something the rest of us didn't. He was handsome, charming when he wanted to be, and distant even when he was standing right beside you. He drank with everyone, played pool with everyone, but nobody really knew him. There was something unusual about Nolan, not in an obvious way. He didn't dress strangely or talk to himself. He just seemed separate from everybody else. I still don't know how long he had been listening. I told him we had the situation handled. We didn't, but I didn't like the idea of him using Dana's fear as an excuse to get close to her. And, looking back, I'll admit, there may have been a little jealousy mixed in too. Nolan stepped closer and said he genuinely wanted to help. Dana told him she planned to speak with the local minister on Sunday. Nolan gave a small smile. He might help, he said, but by Monday morning the whole town will know. Let me take care of it tonight. Then his expression changed. All I ask is that neither of you ever speaks about it afterward. We should have said no. Instead, the three of us climbed into my truck. Dana sat in the middle. Nolan rode by the window with one hand held out in the night air, lifting and lowering it in the wind, as if we were on our way to get breakfast after a long evening. We drove past the abandoned church and followed the gravel road to Dana's house. The place looked ordinary enough. Small, a little worn down. The grass needed cutting, but there was nothing about it that screamed danger. Nolan asked Dana for the key. When I tried to get out with him, he raised one hand. "Stay here," he said. "Keep Dana company." "I won't be long." Then he walked toward the house, alone. He was inside for maybe 10 minutes, no more than that. When he returned, he didn't explain anything. He handed Dana her key, climbed into the truck, fastened his seatbelt, and motioned for me to drive. We were almost back to the bar when Dana finally asked, "Well?" Nolan slowly shook his head. That was all. Nobody spoke again until we reached the parking lot. Dana climbed out on my side, and the two of us stood looking at Nolan across the hood of the truck. He looked tired, but there was something else in his face too. Satisfaction, maybe. "Your daughter will be fine," he said. "Her friend won't bother her anymore. If she asks, tell her he ran away." Then he looked directly at both of us. His voice remained calm, but there was something hard underneath it. "Neither of you will ever speak about tonight. Give me your word." We did. We promised. Then we went back inside the bar. Dana and I ordered another drink. Nolan picked up a pool cue and joined a game as though nothing unusual had happened. But something had changed. Dana noticed it too. Nolan had always been painfully thin, yet when he returned from the house, his stomach was swollen beneath his shirt. Not enormously, just enough to look as though he had eaten a very large meal. By the end of the night, it had nearly disappeared. Dana never mentioned it. Neither did I, and we kept our promise for a long time. Aster is grown now. She drives, works, and has a life of her own. She never spoke to the imaginary boy again. Dana and Aster stayed in that house for another 6 years without a single strange incident. No more voices, no more footsteps, no more injuries. Eventually, they moved somewhere closer to town. As for Nolan, I still see him from time to time. He's still thin, still distant, still has that way of looking at people, as though he knows things they don't. I don't pretend to understand what happened that night. Maybe I don't want to, but I believe Nolan helped Dana and her little girl, and perhaps that was his way of being part of the community. Because in a small town, even the people who stand apart from everyone else sometimes look after their own. You know, I've often thought that if I ever witnessed something truly paranormal, something undeniable, I probably wouldn't handle it well. I might completely unravel under the weight of it. And honestly, maybe that means some doors are better left closed. Curiosity can be powerful, but protecting your peace of mind matters more than satisfying a passing desire to know what might be hiding beyond the ordinary world. We may not have absolute proof about spirits, dark entities, or anything else people associate with the paranormal, but we can still know ourselves. We can imagine certain experiences and recognize, even from a safe distance, that they would be too much for us. That's one of the gifts of imagination. It allows us to test the water without throwing ourselves into the deepest part of the lake. And when that imagined water feels unbearably cold, we're allowed to step back. I had wondered what it might be like to see the things my girlfriend claimed she could see. Part of me was fascinated, but another part of me knew that those experiences weren't meant for me. She believed that trying to communicate too deeply with the other side could attract something dangerous. She worried that a dark presence might attach itself to her or slowly consume her. Strangely, though, she still told me I could use the spirit board, even though she refused to touch it herself. I remember wondering why she was so afraid for herself, yet seemed willing to let me take the same risk. Maybe she believed I was less sensitive. Maybe she thought nothing would answer me. Or perhaps she simply trusted that I would stop before things went too far. That night, however, something changed. After we heard what sounded like a voice from the hallway, followed by a heavy crash from the next room, she became terrified. I sat beside her, touched her cheek, and told her that I would protect her. The truth is, I didn't know what I was protecting her from. I didn't know whether there was an actual presence in the house, whether the sounds had an ordinary explanation, or whether fear had simply taken hold of both of us. I was frightened too, more than I wanted to admit. But in that moment, my fear became smaller than my need to keep her safe. That was the part I couldn't forget. I had always believed that if I encountered something unknown, I would freeze or run. Yet when someone I loved appeared to be in danger, I didn't think about escaping. I moved closer. Maybe that was the real lesson of the evening. It wasn't about proving whether the voice belonged to a spirit. It wasn't about discovering what caused the crash, or deciding whether something dark had entered the room. For those few seconds, none of that mattered to me. I wasn't being driven by fear anymore. I was being driven by love. And when love took over, fear lost its authority. I can't say that I learned much about dark entities that night. I still don't know whether anything supernatural happened at all. What I learned was something far more personal. I learned that I was braver than I thought. When the people I love are threatened, even by something I don't understand, there is a part of me that refuses to retreat. Of course, I also had to admit that we had invited uncertainty into the room. We had placed our hands near that board and opened the conversation without knowing who or what might answer. It was a careless invitation. Perhaps my girlfriend understood the risk better than I did. Perhaps she also understood that there was something stronger in the room than whatever we feared. There was love. She saw it in the way I reacted, and I felt it in myself for the first time. That night didn't convince me that spirits are real. It convinced me that courage can appear the moment someone we love needs us most. I was about 4 years out of medical school when the first incident happened. I was working nights in the emergency department of a small hospital on the outskirts of the city. The hospital was fine for children's care and rehabilitation, but it really wasn't equipped for serious emergencies. We had a CT scanner and an MRI, which looked impressive on paper, but after 9 at night, There was nobody available to operate them. We didn't even have an overnight pathology service. If we needed urgent blood tests, the samples had to be sent by courier to a larger hospital across town. Honestly, a place like that probably shouldn't have been running a 24-hour emergency department. At around 2:30 one morning, a man in his early 50s came in with a severe headache. He said it had been getting steadily worse and wasn't responding to anything he had taken at home. He felt nauseated, his vision seemed slightly blurred, and he looked deeply uncomfortable. But he hadn't vomited yet. I took his history and examined him. At first, there wasn't much to find. His strength was normal, his speech was clear, and there were no obvious signs pointing to a diagnosis. I prescribed stronger pain relief and medication for the nausea, then sat down to write my notes. A few minutes later, I realized I hadn't completed every part of the cranial nerve examination. So I went back. It had only been about 15 minutes, but something had changed. One of his eyes was no longer moving normally. He had developed double vision, and the pain medication hadn't touched his headache. That was the moment I became genuinely frightened. He wasn't just unwell. He was developing new neurological symptoms right in front of me. I spoke to the senior doctor overseeing the department. I tried to explain how worried I was, but I don't think I communicated the urgency clearly enough. His decision was to observe the patient for a few more hours and transfer him to the major hospital once the morning staff arrived. So we waited. The man continued to groan in pain. His nausea worsened, and at some point he began vomiting. Later, he said his vision was closing in, almost as though he were looking through a narrow tunnel. I remember standing there feeling completely trapped. I had a patient who was clearly deteriorating, limited resources, and a senior doctor who had decided against an immediate transfer. I was still junior enough that I didn't know how to push harder without feeling as though I was stepping outside my role. Eventually, he was transferred. The diagnosis was pituitary apoplexy, a sudden hemorrhage into the pituitary gland that can compress the nerves controlling vision and eye movement. That night stayed with me for years, not only because the patient was so sick, but because I knew something was wrong and couldn't find a way to make myself heard. The second incident happened much later, when I was nearing the end of my radiology training. I was performing a CT-guided biopsy on a small lesion in a patient's lung. By then, I had done the procedure many times. It felt familiar, controlled, almost routine. I positioned the needle, confirmed its placement with a quick scan, and took the first tissue sample. Then I turned toward the specimen table. Within seconds, the patient started coughing up blood. At first, it was a small amount. Then it kept coming. We pulled him out of the scanner. I removed the needle and helped sit him upright, hoping the bleeding would settle. It didn't. He coughed again, and more blood poured out. We moved him onto the bed and raised him higher. By then, he had almost filled a suction container. Someone pressed the emergency alarm. The room changed instantly. Nurses rushed to attach monitors and check his blood pressure and oxygen level. His readings were dropping. The emergency team arrived, and suddenly the room was crowded with people moving quickly and calling out instructions. The patient was still coughing blood. We rushed him down the corridor to the emergency department. By the time we reached the resuscitation bay, he was starting to lose consciousness. I stepped back because there was nothing useful I could add. I was the person who knew the procedure, but this was now an airway emergency, and everyone around me was better equipped to handle it. They tried to place a breathing tube, but there was so much blood that they couldn't see his vocal cords. They suctioned continuously and tried again. And again. His blood pressure became impossible to measure. His oxygen level was critically low. Someone began preparing for an emergency surgical airway through the neck. Then, on the final intubation attempt, the tube went in. They suctioned an enormous amount of blood from his airway. Slowly, the bleeding began to ease. His oxygen level started climbing, and the tension in the room shifted, just slightly, from panic to cautious hope. He spent several days in intensive care, but he recovered. By the end of the week, he was able to go home without any neurological damage. He was extraordinarily fortunate. The biopsy result did confirm cancer, so I can't call the outcome entirely lucky. But I remember feeling an uncomfortable kind of relief that the sample had at least provided the diagnosis he needed. Those two cases happened at very different points in my career, but they taught me similar lessons. Medicine can turn without warning. A quiet room can become a crisis in seconds. Experience helps, but it never makes you completely immune to fear. And sometimes, the moments that stay with you aren't the ones where you knew exactly what to do. They're the ones where you felt powerless, stood at the edge of disaster, and hoped the people around you could pull the patient back. So, my parents moved to Pennsylvania because of my dad's job. We were originally from a tiny town in western Massachusetts, the kind of place where the woods seem to stretch forever. Growing up there, I was used to strange noises outside at night, old local legends, and stories about things people couldn't quite explain. When I was a teenager, we moved to a city in Connecticut. I stayed there after my parents eventually relocated to Pennsylvania. About a year after their move, my dad became sick. Then came the diagnosis: cancer. At first, I visited every other weekend. As his condition worsened, I went whenever I could, helping my mom and spending as much time with him as possible. Then, one afternoon, my mom called. Dad had been admitted to the hospital, and the oncologist had told her there were no treatments left to try. It was time to talk about hospice care. My husband and I quickly packed a few things, gathered our 3 children, and started driving. The closer we got to my parents' house, the stranger I felt. Once we crossed into Pennsylvania, this eerie calm washed over me. Part of me felt relieved because we were almost there, but another part of me had simply gone numb. There were too many thoughts, too many emotions, and no room left inside me to hold them all. We met my mom at the house before heading to the hospital. My husband took the kids inside to use the bathroom and get settled, and I stepped outside for a few minutes. I needed air. I needed silence. I needed one small moment before facing what was waiting for us. I walked toward a clearing at the edge of the yard. The sky was glowing with the most incredible sunset I had ever seen. Golden light poured through the clouds in long, bright beams, almost like something painted across the ceiling of an old cathedral. Then the sunlight began to fade, and suddenly, the entire clearing lit up. Fireflies were everywhere. There must have been hundreds of them, blinking all around me in the grass and beneath the trees. I had grown up surrounded by forests, but somehow I had never seen fireflies like that before. Everyone close to me knew how much I loved anything that glowed or sparkled. I had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights, and standing there felt like the sky had brought a smaller version of them down just for me. For a moment, I honestly wondered whether I was imagining it. I called my husband and told him to bring the children outside. I will never forget what happened next. My 3 little kids ran into the clearing, laughing and spinning through the grass. Fireflies flickered around them like tiny floating stars. The children chased them, reached toward them, and twirled beneath the fading sky. It felt like we had stepped into another world. Maybe it was only a coincidence. Maybe it was simply the right season, the right weather, and the right moment. But deep inside, it felt like something was trying to remind us that beauty still existed. It was as though the universe knew we were about to face one of the hardest days of our lives and had decided to give us one perfect memory first. Later, when we arrived at the hospital, my dad was drifting in and out of consciousness. At one point, he opened his eyes, looked at me, and quietly asked, "Did you enjoy the little light show?" I didn't understand what he meant at first. I hadn't told him about the sunset or the fireflies. As far as I knew, there was no way he could have known what we had just witnessed. Maybe it was a reach. Maybe he was confused or dreaming. Still, the way he said it stayed with me. Even now, there are moments when I suddenly feel his presence. It might happen during a quiet evening, on a difficult day, or when I am missing him more than usual. And every so often, not long after that feeling arrives, a firefly appears. I used to work for a water transfer company in rural Pennsylvania, not far from the West Virginia border. Our job was to move water through miles of heavy plastic pipeline to different fracking sites. Because the land out there was nothing but steep hills, deep valleys, and thick woods, we had to set up booster stations along the route to keep the water flowing. Those stations were usually extremely isolated. Most of the time, it was just a portable light tower, a massive compressor, and one worker sitting alone in the darkness. We carried handheld radios, but the signal was unreliable. Sometimes the nearest person was more than a mile away, usually somewhere higher up the hill. One night, I was stationed at the bottom of a valley beside a narrow creek. The site sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by dense woods. I had a company truck with me, although one of the tires had gone nearly flat. The engine still worked, so I could use the heat and charge my equipment. Apart from that, I had the compressor, the light tower, a portable toilet, and a large handheld spotlight. There was no phone service at all. At around 2 in the morning, the fracking operation shut down temporarily, so all the pumps stopped. The silence came on suddenly. When those compressors had been running for hours, you almost forgot how loud they were. Once they stopped, the entire valley felt strangely empty. All I could hear was the creek moving over the rocks. Then something cracked in the woods. It was loud enough to make me sit upright. A few seconds later, I heard branches snapping and something heavy crashing through the brush about 30 yards in front of the truck. At first, I thought it might be a deer. I grabbed the spotlight and aimed it toward the tree line, slowly sweeping the beam back and forth. I could see trunks, leaves, and tangled undergrowth, but nothing else. The crashing stopped. I remember holding the light perfectly still, staring into those trees, and trying to convince myself that whatever had made the noise was gone. Then the roar came. I still struggle to describe it. It was not a normal animal sound. It was so deep and powerful that I felt it inside my chest. The mirrors on the truck trembled while it was happening. It seemed to fill the entire valley, as though the sound were coming from everywhere at once. Before I could react, a thick branch came flying out of the darkness and slammed into the front of the truck. Then I heard something large tearing away through the woods. I was terrified. Not nervous, not startled. I mean physically sick with fear. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely use the radio. The worker at the next station had heard the roar from more than a mile uphill. I asked him to come get me, and thankfully, he did. For the rest of the night, neither of us went back down there alone. Whenever the pumps needed fuel or had to be restarted, we drove down together. After that night, I refused to work at that station by myself. A few other workers reported strange noises in the same area after I left that assignment. None of their experiences were exactly like mine, but enough happened that people became uneasy about the place. Later, I heard a story from another crew that had taken over the site. For several nights, they had been hearing heavy movement and repeated crashing sounds inside the same section of woods. Eventually, they adjusted the 4 lamps on the light tower so that every bulb pointed directly toward the tree line. Not long after that, the light tower was destroyed. During a crew change, the site was left unattended for less than an hour. When the next workers arrived, they found the entire unit shoved down the bank and partially submerged in the creek. The frame was twisted, the lights were shattered, and the machine was beyond repair. Could a group of people have done it? Possibly, but the location was so remote that anyone responsible would have needed to hide in those woods for long periods of time, waiting for the brief moments when the station was empty. What disturbed me most was the pattern. Whenever someone aimed a bright light into that particular tree line, something seemed to happen. Sometimes the incidents occurred several nights in a row. Other times, weeks passed without anything unusual. I was relieved when the project finally ended. About 2 weeks later, a man I had worked with for years returned to the site to retrieve a piece of equipment. He arrived shortly after sunset and went alone. This was not someone who frightened easily. He had spent countless nights working by himself in remote forests and had never complained about feeling unsafe. But he said that the moment he stepped out of his truck, something felt wrong. He had the strong sensation that he was being watched. More than that, he felt as though he had entered a place where he was not welcome. He tried to ignore it. He attached the equipment to the truck and started driving back up the gravel road. As he passed the tree line, he saw something standing only a few feet away. He described it as a huge, broad black figure. It stood upright, completely still, watching him through the passenger side window as he drove past. He never saw its face clearly. He only saw the size of it, the shape of its shoulders, and the way it remained motionless at the edge of the woods. He told me it was the most frightening thing he had ever seen. And after what happened to me in that same valley, I believed him. I've had a few strange experiences around Chickies Ridge, including one encounter with what people now call the Hat Man. There was also something else in the nearby woods and town, but that's a story for another time. This happened almost 20 years ago when I was still in high school. I didn't know until recently that people had created websites and discussion pages about the figure. Back then, I thought what happened to me was something I had experienced alone. I was 16, maybe a junior, and I'd just gone through a rough breakup. You know how everything feels enormous at that age. I needed to get out of the house and clear my head, so after school, I decided to walk to Chickies Ridge. The ridge sits between two small Pennsylvania towns, close to the river. It isn't exactly a mountain, but when you're climbing it on foot, it certainly feels like one. There's a trail along the water, and a few different paths leading toward the overlook. It was early April, and the weather had been miserable all day. The sky was heavy and gray, and a thin drizzle kept coming and going. It took me a little over an hour to reach the trail. From there, I followed a narrow, winding path up the steep side of the ridge. I reached the overlook sometime after 5 in the afternoon. Nobody else was there, which wasn't unusual given the weather. I sat near the top for a long time, staring at the river and thinking about everything that had gone wrong in my life. At least, everything that felt wrong to a teenager. After a while, I noticed the light beginning to fade. The clouds made it seem much later than it actually was, and I knew I needed to start heading home. Calling my parents for a ride would have meant explaining why I had walked all the way out there, so I decided to make the trip back on my own. I had barely started down when I heard something moving behind me. At first, it sounded harmless. A twig snapping, leaves shifting, the soft crunch of gravel. I assumed another hiker was coming down the trail, or maybe climbing up toward the overlook. But whenever I stopped, the sound stopped too. I kept walking, trying not to let my imagination take over. The trail twisted back and forth across the hillside, so I couldn't see very far ahead or behind me. When I was perhaps 100 feet from the bottom, I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy boot pressing into the dirt above me. I looked up. A man was standing on one of the higher bends in the trail. He was tall, taller than anyone I remembered passing on the way up. His clothes were so dark that they blended into the trees, and I couldn't make out his face at all. The only clear detail was the wide-brimmed hat on his head. He wasn't moving. He was simply standing there, looking directly down at me. I can't explain how I knew, but every instinct in my body told me that he wanted to hurt me. So I ran. I charged down the remaining stretch of trail, slipped on the wet ground, and tore open the knee of my jeans. I barely felt it. Behind me, I heard the heavy footsteps again, but they weren't following the winding trail. They were coming straight down the hillside. Each step sounded closer than the last, as though the man was walking through the brush and over the rocks without slowing down. I reached the bottom and spun around. There was nobody there. The trail was empty, and the hillside above me had already disappeared into the darkness. For a moment, I wondered whether I had imagined everything. Then I heard the boots reach the bottom of the hill, and they started running. I took off along the riverside trail. I must have run nearly 2 miles without stopping. My lungs were burning, my knee was bleeding, and every few seconds I could hear those footsteps somewhere behind me. I only looked back once. I didn't see a person. I could barely see anything at all. There was only the pale gray sky, the black shapes of the trees, and the river beside me. Still, the footsteps kept coming. I didn't slow down until I reached the first streets of town. Even then, I kept running past houses and parked cars until the sound finally disappeared. Later, I told a few friends what had happened. That was when other strange things began happening around town. Things in the woods, noises outside houses, shadows where shadows shouldn't have been. But those stories came later. That night on the ridge was the beginning. I actually grew up near those mountains, so stories like this were just part of everyday life. Every town had its own warnings. There were railroad tracks where people swore an unseen force would push your car to safety if you stopped on them. There was a narrow back road with sharp bends, and the rule was that if you counted 13 curves after dark, you were supposed to turn around immediately. No questions, just leave. Then there were the old mountain rules. Never whistle in the woods. Close the curtains before nightfall. If you step outside and every insect, bird, and animal has suddenly gone silent, go back indoors. And if you believe something is following you through the trees, find running water and cross it. Nobody ever explained these rules in much detail. They were simply passed down, the same way you might teach a child not to touch a hot stove. A lot of the families in that region could trace their ancestry back to villages near Germany's Black Forest. Sometimes I wonder whether those settlers brought their old folklore with them, then reshaped it to fit the Appalachian wilderness. Or maybe they recognized something familiar in those forests. The Appalachian Mountains are ancient. They were already old long before most of the world looked the way it does now. When you grow up around them, it is easy to believe they remember things. My own family had plenty of strange stories. My mother worked nights at a church-run residential home for children with disabilities. Several employees claimed they occasionally saw a nun walking through the hallways in an old-fashioned black habit. She never spoke. She would simply pass an open doorway and disappear around a corner. The unsettling part was that the building had not employed nuns in decades. We also lived in a house where unusual things happened regularly. The doorbell would ring during heavy snow, but when we opened the door, there would be no one there. Not even footprints leading up to the porch. Objects would suddenly fly out of a locked display cabinet. Toys would be arranged across the living room overnight, even though everyone insisted they had gone to bed before the room was cleaned. The youngest child in the house had imaginary friends, but they did things ordinary imaginary friends could not do. They would supposedly tell the child where hidden objects had been placed, even when those objects were inside cupboards the child could not reach. Sometimes the child repeated private conversations that had happened in another part of the house. Those friends were not always kind either. They encouraged dangerous little games. Chairs would be moved near staircases. Toys would appear in places where someone might trip. The child often blamed the imaginary friends after getting hurt. Years later, when I was a teenager, my father moved us onto an old farm owned by the woman he was seeing. The property had been in her family for generations, and the main house was well over a century old. A relative had recently died there, and some of the strange activity seemed connected to him. He had been extremely careful about electricity. He believed appliances should be unplugged whenever they were not being used. After his death, we constantly found the television, washing machine, lamps, and even the refrigerator unplugged. His favorite wooden chair would sometimes begin rocking on its own. The matching footstool would move with it, perfectly in rhythm, as though someone were sitting there. There were other things that nobody could explain. At night, we sometimes heard a baby crying somewhere across the fields. The farm was isolated, and the nearest neighbors were too far away for us to hear anything from their homes. There were no infants living anywhere nearby. The crying never seemed to come from the same direction twice. I also kept a small brass wind chime in my bedroom. It would begin ringing violently in the middle of the night, even though the windows were shut and it was nowhere near a vent. Sometimes it would continue until I turned on the light. The moment the room was illuminated, it stopped. The strangest place on the property was the old spring house. It was large enough to use as a clubhouse, and there were several teenagers living on the farm. We all had friends visiting on weekends, so you would think someone would have claimed it as a private hangout. Nobody did. We never discussed it. We simply avoided the building. The farmhouse used a newer well, but the spring house sat over an underground water source that had once supplied the livestock and fields. By the time we lived there, it had been abandoned for years. I cannot remember whether the family ever told us a specific story about it. Too much time has passed. But I remember standing near that building and having a very clear thought. People say running water can keep certain things from following you. Maybe it can keep something trapped, too. I never went inside to find out. The region had other mysteries as well. Beneath one of the nearby towns was a massive cave system that had once been used for government offices before being converted into a secure storage facility. After the attacks in September 2001, military vehicles arrived and blocked access to the entrances. Extra protection around the chemical plant made sense. So did increased security at the facility that processed radioactive waste. But the caves puzzled me. They were already hidden underground, surrounded by layers of stone. That seemed like protection enough. Yet during that period, they were guarded more heavily than almost anything else in the area. I still wonder what they were storing down there. Growing up in those mountains taught me that every community has stories people tell for entertainment. But some warnings are repeated too carefully to be jokes. And sometimes, when an entire town knows not to whistle after dark, it may be worth listening. Hey there. I want to share a couple of stories from my youth that have stuck with me over the years. Both a little eerie, a little mysterious, and, honestly, unforgettable. So, grab a seat and I'll take you through them like we're just chatting by the fire. First, let me take you back to my childhood in rural America. Picture this: no neighbors for miles, just endless woods stretching out in every direction. I grew up there, and as a kid, I was fascinated by the woods, always wandering, imagining battles with my collection of swords. Some were wooden, Some were real blades my dad let me have. It was a world all my own. Now, my dad had this quirky tradition. He'd pay me and my friends if we killed any venomous snakes we found while exploring. We'd go out hoping to find copperheads or rattlesnakes, but, truth be told, we barely found anything. Maybe 3 or 4 copperheads over several years. Most of the time, we were just messing around, and any snakes were just lucky finds. One night, my buddy, let's call him Jame, and I decided to go out on a late-night snake hunt. It was around midnight, pitch dark except for our flashlights. We made our way to the edges of my family's property and plunged into a part of the woods we'd never explored before. The air was thick and still, the kind of stillness that makes your ears perk up for any sound. We were confident, though, not scared at all. Our flashlights cut through the dark. Our swords felt like extensions of ourselves, and teenage bravado had us feeling invincible. But as we tried to get our bearings, something strange happened. We started hearing this knocking noise. It wasn't random or natural. It was a deliberate, rhythmic knock, like someone was banging wood against a tree in a steady pattern. Knock, 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 knock. It was loud and steady, echoing through the trees. Jame and I exchanged a look, the kind that says, "This isn't right." Without a word, we both said, "Run," and took off in the opposite direction as fast as we could. Our hearts were pounding, breath ragged. The thorny vines scratched us up as we scrambled through the underbrush. It felt like the knocking was chasing us, but it never actually followed. We didn't stop until we burst onto the nearest road, 5 minutes later, panting and bleeding, but safe. The knocking noise stopped somewhere behind us as we ran, fading into the distance. We went back during daylight to check out the area, but there was no sign of anyone living there. No cabins, no campsites, nothing. We never figured out what that sound was, and after that night, we never went back to those woods after dark. Now, for the second story. This one's from South Louisiana, near a place called Cretchen Point Plantation. It's a spot steeped in history and ghost stories. Folks say it was a Civil War hospital, with gruesome tales of the front doors being used as stretchers, and even legends involving the infamous pirate Jean Lafitte. It's surrounded by sugarcane fields and dirt roads, with a few trailer homes scattered about, making the silence and isolation almost tangible. When I was 16, my friends and I would spend Saturday nights driving around those dirt roads, getting a little wild with beer and music, calling it ghost hunting. Honestly, it was mostly us getting drunk, blasting rap music, chain smoking, and occasionally rolling down the windows to see if we could spot anything strange. One night, though, something really strange happened. We stopped in front of the main house of the plantation, completely dark, surrounded by nothing but fields. We turned off our truck's lights and just stood there, scanning the area. One of my friends suddenly pointed toward the side of the house, near some old cabins that I think were once slave quarters. At first, it looked like a woman kneeling in the yard. We were all struck. Who would be out there on their knees at midnight? Curious and a little uneasy, I ran back to the truck to grab my binoculars. Peering through them, I saw her clearly. A woman slowly standing up, moving towards the house with an almost ghostly grace. Her arms swayed gently by her sides, and she moved as if she was weightless, utterly at peace. Here's the weirdest part. She seemed to glow. Not like the moonlight or any light source around her. Just her. It was faint but unmistakable, like she was made of shimmering moonlight itself. I noticed something even stranger. The trees behind her could be seen through her faint outline. She was translucent. I handed the binoculars to my friends to make sure I wasn't imagining things. They looked and nodded, clearly shaken. We all just stood there, watching this glowing woman for what felt like hours, but was really about 4 minutes. The longer we stared, the heavier the fear settled in. This wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't just a drunken hallucination. Then, out of nowhere, we heard gravel crunching and saw headlights about an eighth of a mile down the road. The moment the truck's headlights appeared, the woman simply faded away, like someone flipped off a light switch. Just gone. We bolted from that place as fast as we could. To this day, I don't know what we saw. I don't claim to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but that night, it changed something in me. It made me question what's out there beyond what we can see or understand. So that's my story. 2 nights, 2 strange encounters that left me with more questions than answers. Maybe you think it's just stories, or maybe you believe something more. Either way, I hope these tales give you a little chill and a lot to think about. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share with you 2 stories that actually happened in the same summer, just a few days apart. I'll start with the first one. It's about a night that really stayed with me, and I want you to feel like you're right there with me. So, a bit of backstory first. My sister, her name's Lily, she's 29 and I'm 21. We come from this huge family, lots of cousins and even more kids running around. Back in 2018, our grandparents passed away. They were the heart and soul of our family, really, the pillars everyone leaned on. Their house, it was ours, you know? Most of us grew up there, and it's where the whole family gathered for every holiday, birthday, you name it. Losing them was tough. Everyone was still wrapped up in that sadness, trying to find a way through it. Now, on to that night. I was home alone. Lily was working late, and I was stuck there because my mom and aunt had locked the wooden back door, but not the glass one behind it. Problem was, I didn't have the keys to lock that glass door, so technically, someone could come in from the front, but not the back. My mom and aunt hadn't gone grocery shopping yet because Lily and I were watching our little cousin, Emma, who's only 4. If they left, she'd notice and probably cry, so no one left the house. I decided to just chill out, playing a game on my phone to pass the time. Then, out of nowhere, I started hearing a guitar. It was so faint that I had to bring the phone closer to my ear to be sure. At first I thought, maybe my phone volume is low? But I realized I had it on silent. Confused, I walked out onto the balcony to see if anyone was playing guitar outside. The street below is lined with restaurants, and it's pretty normal to hear music coming from there. But tonight, there was no one with a guitar. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, maybe an auditory hallucination. First time it ever happened to me in 21 years. It made some kind of sense, right? Then, after a bit, I started hearing chairs moving downstairs. Now, this wasn't totally strange because we have 4 cats who love napping in those chairs. But the weird part was, 2 chairs were moving at the same time. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the cats. Then, there was a knock on the glass door. I froze. I looked down from the stairs. No one was there. I didn't even want to go downstairs, so I hurried upstairs to check the balcony again. No one. I moved to the other room above the wooden door. Still nothing. The people who use that door are elderly, and they always take their time walking, so if someone had come in, I would have heard them. I lay back down on the bed, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that something wasn't right. And that's when I heard it, Emma's laugh, coming from downstairs. The sound was so clear, so innocent, but it made me stop in my tracks. I didn't move. My heart was pounding, and I texted a friend, telling her I was scared. I told her the house is big, 2 floors, and to calm myself down, I decided to give her a little video tour. I swear, I've never felt so brave in my life. You see, my sister, my dad, and one of my cousins have all had encounters with ghosts, so I do believe in them. But still, I wanted to check anyway. I switched on every single light as I moved through the house. By the time I reached the bottom floor, There was no one there. No sign of Emma. I went back upstairs, took a deep breath, and turned off all the lights. Ant gets annoyed when lights are left on for no reason. After a while, everything was silent again. Just the normal house sounds until my mom and aunt came back from the supermarket. It was a long night, and honestly, I felt like I was being watched the whole time. Okay, now for the second story. This one is from my friend who's Native American. He's a mix of Oglala Lakota, Navajo, Apache, and Cherokee. His name's Jason. It's a bit complicated with all the tribes, but Jason is deeply connected to his heritage, and his girlfriend, who's Chickasaw, is just as involved. They live in an area where there aren't many native people, so most of the natives in the region know each other. There's this one old man, a native elder, who lives near a river in a tiny shack. He has 2 dogs and a cat. On the surface, he seems harmless, but Jason and his girlfriend both felt uneasy around him. He's known for doing bad medicine, and he even bragged about being a shapeshifter. Jason went to visit the shack once with his girlfriend to get a charger she had lent the old man. The place was creepy from the start. The dog was chained to an umbrella, panting like it was scared. The cat was skinny and hiding under an old pickup truck that hadn't moved in years, and there was a little chicken coop nearby. When the old man finally arrived, he invited them inside. The shack was cramped and smelled stale. The pit bull inside was barking uncontrollably, so the old man let it out into the yard. He showed them a biscuit recipe, a drum that supposedly plays itself at night unless covered with a blanket, and then they stepped outside to talk. That's when things got dark. The old man spoke about using his medicine to kill people long ago. His eyes, Jason described them as dead, black with a silver ring around them, the kind of eyes that chill you to the bone. Jason and his girlfriend left as soon as they could, taking the charger with them. A couple of weeks later, Jason was driving home around midnight. His car has bright HID headlights, so he could see far ahead. As he pulled into his driveway, he got out to grab something from the passenger seat. That's when he noticed a huge, scraggly canine standing in the gravel, as tall as his mailbox. His hair stood on end like he'd been shocked. One second the dog wasn't there, and the next it was locked onto him, watching his every move. Jason yelled at it, and the creature moved a little further down the road, still watching him, then started coming closer. He shouted again, grabbed something from his seat, and when he turned back, the dog was gone. No noise, no trace. That, he said, was what it's like to encounter a skinwalker. It's not just about snapping twigs in the woods or strange noises. Sometimes it's silence, and the sudden, terrifying presence of something that shouldn't be there. Both stories, they stick with you, don't they? The eerie silence, the unexplained sounds, the eyes that see too much. Makes you wonder about what lurks just beyond the edge of what we can understand. So I had 4 experiences today that probably wouldn't seem unusual on their own, but when I put them all together, they honestly left me pretty shaken. For context, I live in the Appalachian region of the United States, where people tend to have plenty of stories about strange sounds, animals, and things you're better off leaving alone. The first thing happened early this morning. When I got into my car, I heard something moving around in the far side of the carport. It sounded large enough to make several tools hanging on the metal wall rattle against each other. I couldn't actually see what it was, but I immediately got this heavy, sinking feeling in my stomach. I didn't investigate. I just started the car and left as quickly as I could. Later, after my shift ended, I heard an awful screeching sound outside. The best way I can describe it is a crow's cry mixed with the buzzing shriek of a cicada. I work near loud industrial equipment, so the first couple of times I heard it, I assumed it was coming from one of the machines. But the third time, I was much farther from the building. The machinery had faded into the background, and I could hear the sound clearly. It definitely wasn't a machine. I hurried to my car, got inside, and locked the doors. Whenever something frightens me, I have this terrible habit of looking up into the trees, even though people around here always joke that you're not supposed to do that. There was a large tree above the parking area, and part of its trunk looked exactly like a skull. The markings in the bark formed deep eye sockets, a nose, even the shape of teeth. I sometimes experience visual hallucinations, so I pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture. The strange part was that I could still see the skull with my own eyes, but I couldn't find it anywhere on the camera screen. That scared me enough to leave immediately. I met a few friends for dinner later that evening, and while we were sitting together, I searched for explanations for the screeching sound and the skull-like image in the tree. One of the automated search summaries suggested that things like that could be interpreted as warnings or messages from ancestors. I know those summaries aren't always reliable, but the idea stayed in my head. While driving home, I started thinking about everything that had happened. Finally, I spoke out loud and asked for a harmless sign that, if anything really was trying to reach me, it wasn't something malicious. In my mind, I pictured an animal crossing the road. Less than 10 seconds later, a large cat-like animal ran directly in front of my car. It could easily have been an ordinary cat, although it looked noticeably bigger than most house cats. Animals do cross roads, of course, but it isn't something I often see on that particular stretch. By then, I was already nervous, so the timing felt much more significant than it probably would have on any other day. The final incident happened when I got home. A motion-activated light was glowing in the backyard, and there was an animal sitting beneath it. At first, I assumed it was one of my dogs. I have 3, and 2 of them are fairly large. But when I checked, all 3 dogs were inside the house. I went to get my mother so she could look too. By the time we returned, the animal was gone, although the motion light was still shining. Under normal circumstances, I would have assumed it was a raccoon, a stray dog, or some other animal wandering through the yard. But after everything else that had happened, it felt like one more piece of an unsettling pattern. I should also be honest about something important. Mental illness runs in my family, including conditions that can involve hallucinations or psychosis. I also recently ran out of my antidepressant medication. I was alone during every one of these experiences, so nobody else can confirm exactly what I saw or heard. That's part of what frightens me. I'm trying not to turn a series of ordinary events into something supernatural. The carport noise could have been an animal. The screech might have come from local wildlife. The skull could have been my brain finding a familiar shape in the bark, and the animals may simply have crossed my path at memorable moments. Still, when several strange things happen in one day, it's difficult not to feel as though they're connected. More than anything, I think I need reassurance that I'm frightening myself, and that there are ordinary explanations for what happened. And because I've been without my medication, I probably shouldn't ignore the possibility that my mind is under more strain than usual. This happened last summer, in 2025, right around the 4th of July. It was late, somewhere between about 12:30 and 4 in the morning, and I was 27 at the time. I'm only 4'11", so I've always been pretty aware of how vulnerable I can feel when I'm alone. That night, all I had on me was pepper spray and my phone, and honestly, after what happened, that didn't feel like nearly enough. It's the reason I eventually got licensed to carry for protection. My brother, Darren, and a few of his friends had built this little fort deep in the woods, about 3 miles from the parking lot at Settlesbridge Park. They had gone ahead before me, and I showed up late, close to 12:40 in the morning. So I had to walk the trail by myself. My phone was at something like 16%, and I didn't want to waste the battery using the flashlight. Luckily, The moon was full and bright enough to see by, so I just let that guide me. The first part of the trail was this old logging road off to the left side of the parking lot. It was overgrown, with trees crowding in on both sides, and the farther I got, the more it felt like the woods were swallowing the sound around me. I was a little more than halfway down that road when I saw it. There was a tall white figure standing near a tree on the left side of the trail. It wasn't walking. It wasn't hiding. It was just standing there, rocking from side to side. And I remember my mind going completely cold and practical for a second. I started calculating how far I was from my car, how far I was from the fort. What would happen if I turned around? What would happen if I ran? But every instinct in my body told me turning back was the worst thing I could do. I don't know how to explain it without sounding dramatic, but something in me knew not to react, not to stare too hard, not to scream, not to let it know I had seen it. So I kept walking. I walked right past it. I didn't look directly at it once I got close. I just kept my pace steady and continued down the logging road until I reached the spot where the path turned sharply left into the trees, maybe 10 feet before the road ended. From there, I walked another couple of miles on this rough, hard-to-follow trail, using nothing but moonlight to keep myself oriented. Eventually, I found the fort. It was built on the other side of an old chain-link fence, and I had to crawl under a gap to get through. My brother and his friends were already there, sitting around the campfire like everything was normal. I didn't say anything about what I had seen. At some point, Darren asked me to go find more firewood, so I took a flashlight they gave me and started looking around. We all had this kind of unspoken belief that the other side of the fence was where the bad feeling was, that our side was safe. We were wrong. I started walking up this hill, sweeping the flashlight around, looking for branches. And at the top of the hill, maybe 70 or 80 feet away, I saw the profile of something standing on all fours. Its face looked wrong, flat, too still. I told myself it was a deer. I needed it to be a deer. So I just turned around, left the firewood, went back to the fire, and sat down. Again, I said nothing. The rest of the night went on in this strange, almost normal way. Some of them fired guns into the hill I had just climbed. They drank a little, though I didn't. They set off fireworks in a small clearing they had made, and some of them smoked. Eventually, we decided my brother and one of his friends would drive us back in my car. The walk back to the parking lot was quiet. Nothing happened. And honestly, that almost made it worse. When we got to the car, I sat in the passenger seat and stared out the window, scanning the trees. I don't even think I was doing it consciously. I was just waiting to see it again. Then my brother started backing out. And there it was. It was standing on two legs among the trees, maybe 50 feet into the woods, directly in front of the area where our cars had been parked. I don't know whether it had followed us or if it had been waiting there the whole time, knowing we'd have to come back. But I saw it. I swear I watched it drop down onto all fours. Then it ran. It broke into a full sprint and chased the car through the woods. We were going around 35 miles per hour, and this thing kept up. It was running on all fours, zigzagging between the trees, matching us like the forest wasn't even slowing it down. It only veered away when we reached the fence line near the houses. I still don't know what it was. I don't have a clean explanation for it, but I've seen it more than once since then. The fort isn't really there anymore. The nearby HOA had it taken apart, so now there are just some structural remains and an old deer stand out there. And the part that still sits heavy with me is this. My brother and I both had another encounter with it recently, just a few weeks ago in May. So whatever that thing is, I don't think it ever really left. I need to tell you what happened when we went back to that house in Armory Park, because honestly, even now, I'm still trying to make sense of it. It had been a couple of weeks since I last shared anything. We needed space after everything that happened the first time. Not just physical rest either. It felt like our minds needed to come down from a kind of static that had followed us home. The first visit had already left us shaken. My girlfriend, Lena, had sensed something strong around that house before we even started investigating. We got activity on the EMF meters, strange responses through the spirit box, and at one point, I developed this awful migraine and nausea while she seemed to be communicating with what we believed was a little girl. We had left quickly that night because there were people nearby, and we didn't want to draw attention to what we were doing. But both of us felt like the session wasn't finished. So, before we posted about that first visit, we had already gone back a second time, and I really wish the warnings had reached us sooner. Afterward, people told us to be careful. They reminded us that spirits can mislead you. Something can present itself as small, sad, or harmless, but that doesn't mean it is. We were told to protect ourselves, set boundaries, and never assume anything is safe just because it feels wounded. That advice stayed with us, but by then, we had already experienced what I'm about to tell you. When Lena and I sat down at home to review the recording from the second visit, the lights flickered the second we brought out the recorder. We both laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. It was that nervous kind, the kind you use when your body knows something is wrong before your mind is ready to admit it. Then I pressed play, and the lights flickered again. I shut the audio off immediately. I remember sitting there thinking, no, this is not happening. Lena looked just as stunned as I felt. Her eyes were wide, and she just kept shaking her head. Then we started talking about the warnings people had given us, especially the ones telling us not to go back to that house. As soon as we mentioned that, the lights flickered a third time. At that point, we both took a breath, grabbed our protection stones, and pressed play. That night, we had parked around the corner because we didn't want anyone noticing us. Lena said she could already feel the energy from blocks away. The closer we got, the heavier it seemed to become. When we reached the gate, I decided to check the side yard first, just to make sure nobody was there. Right as Lena was about to step in, I heard what sounded like marching. Not vague footsteps, not maybe the wind. It sounded like someone walking over gravel with purpose. I whispered for her to wait and looked around, but there was nobody there. It was dark, yes, but not so dark that I wouldn't have seen someone nearby. That somehow made it worse. By the time I moved toward Lena, she had already gone through the gate. Her EMF meter was glowing in her hand, and she was speaking gently. "Do you remember us?" she asked. "We came back, like we said we would." We walked up the concrete steps toward the front door, and that's when I heard it. It sounded like a little girl singing along to soft, nursery-like music. I got so uncomfortable that I backed away from the entryway. I started questioning whether I was really hearing it, but my body wasn't waiting for proof. It wanted distance. Lena kept trying to communicate. "Are you here?" she asked. The spirit box answered, even though I realized I had forgotten to turn on the scanner. Still, we both clearly heard, "Here." A little later, we heard, "No." Then, "Breathe." Lena asked, "Is there a little girl here?" "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" That's when this strange, loud sound cut through the air. The only way I can describe it is like an old science fiction UFO sound effect from the 1970s. Right after it, a deep male voice came through and boomed, "I don't know it." It felt like something was trying to speak over the child. Lena asked, "Is there a man here?" Nothing answered. Then she asked, "Is there someone here who lost their mommy?" A male voice replied with something that sounded like either no or go. Either way, it made my stomach drop. Right after that, a child's voice whispered, "Yeah." Lena asked, "Are you upset with us? Are you mad that we're here?" The answer came back, "Away." There was a small wooden bench in the front yard, and Lena noticed it. She asked, "Would you like me to sit there?" A woman's voice answered, "Yeah." For a minute or so, things went quiet. Then we heard a male cough come through the spirit box. A moment later, there was rustling from the side yard. Lena turned toward it and asked, "Are you playing back there?" The response chilled me. "Mommy?" Then came silence, and then a male voice said very clearly, "Stay." Lena tried again. "If you can't give me your first name, can you give me your last name?" A younger male voice came through. It sounded like Gavin or maybe Levin. It was hard to tell. Then we heard, "I died." Immediately after that, something snapped. "Shh." Lena asked, "Did something bad happen to you and your mommy?" The answer was, "Yeah." A couple of minutes passed. Then a clear female voice yelled, "Go away!" Lena asked, "Did something bad happen inside this house?" Again, the answer was, "Yeah." That was when we noticed movement at the house across the street. It felt like attention was shifting toward us, and not the kind we wanted. I said, "I think it's time to go." As we reached to turn off the spirit box, one last voice came through. "Stay, please." Lena quickly stated our boundaries. She thanked whoever had communicated with us, made it clear nothing could follow us, and we left as fast as we could. When we got home, we tried to talk through everything, but the conversation collapsed under this heavy wave of negativity. It felt like something had settled between us, thick and sour, and neither of us wanted to sit inside it anymore. After reviewing everything and listening back to what we captured, we decided to trust our instincts. We are not going back. Honestly, I still don't know what to make of any of this. I don't know if it was supernatural or if my brain just started stitching random things together because I was scared. But this has been happening over the last several months, and the more I think about it, the harder it is to brush off. It started on a day when I was really upset. I needed to clear my head, so I went walking down this old dirt road I almost never take. That's when I found the tree. It was bent into this strange U shape, almost like an arch or a doorway. The second I saw it, I got this heavy feeling in my chest. Not just regular nerves either. It felt like I was being watched. I stood there for a minute, trying to talk myself out of being creeped out. But every time I looked past the tree toward the path behind it, that feeling got worse. Like something was quietly telling me not to go any farther. So I left. When I got back near my house, I noticed a small black cat watching me from down the road. It was just sitting there, staring. For some reason, I decided to walk toward it, and it ran into this perfectly round opening in the woods. I could probably crawl into it if I really wanted to, but I absolutely do not want ticks crawling all over me, so no thank you. At first, I didn't think too much of it. Weird tree, weird cat, strange day. That was all. But a couple of days later, I went back to the tree. I don't even know why. I still don't. The same feeling was there. That pressure, that dread, that sense that something was paying attention to me. I got a little closer than before, but I still couldn't make myself walk past it. On my way home, I saw the black cat again, and I knew it was the same one because of the way it moved. It had this odd, rocking kind of walk, almost like it was limping, but not exactly. It's hard to explain. It was closer this time, just staring at me. We stared at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, but when I finally snapped out of it, I realized way more time had passed than I thought. Its eyes were what really bothered me. They looked almost completely black, except for one tiny yellow dot in the middle. After that, I told a few people about the tree. Some thought it was creepy. Some said the picture I took of it gave them the same uneasy feeling. Other people said it just looked like a cool tree. For a while, nothing major happened. I kept visiting the tree every now and then, and every time, I still felt like I shouldn't go beyond it. Then one day, I took my sister with me because I had this dumb little mission in my head. I was going to touch the tree. I did touch it. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No noise, no vision, nothing like that. But right after I pulled my hand away, this cold breeze moved through, and the dread hit me harder than ever. It was so intense that I felt something I don't even know how to name. My sister and I ran back. Later, I remembered that while I was touching the tree, it looked like something moved in the bushes nearby. Maybe it was just the wind. I really don't know. After that, things got quieter for a bit, but then I had 2 dreams. The first one was about this flat, almost two-dimensional goat-looking thing. It stood on its hind legs, with its neck bent at a horrible angle. It moved toward me slowly, very slowly. And the feeling in the dream was exactly like the feeling I got from the tree. I woke up before it reached me, but I didn't want to sleep for days after that. The second dream was about the black cat. It was staring at me again, except this time its eyes were completely yellow. Then, for a while, things settled down. Fast forward a few months. I had started getting into spirit communication, witchcraft, and trying to sharpen my intuition. Eventually, I bought a spirit box and started experimenting with it. At first, I used it near the woods by my road. I got a few responses, but nothing huge. Then one day, my curiosity got the better of me. I took the spirit box and an app with me back to the U-shaped tree. That's when things changed. I stayed there longer than I ever had before, probably around an hour. I sat near the tree, asking questions about it, about whether anything was attached to it, whether I should be worried. The first word that came through was, hide. And I remember thinking, well, that's not exactly comforting. But I stayed. The responses were strange and vague. It didn't really answer me directly. Sometimes it felt like whatever was coming through wanted to ask me questions instead. It mentioned a machine. It mentioned a box. At one point it said, "Move it." So I moved a piece of paper on the ground, thinking maybe that was what it meant. No response. Eventually I decided I was done. I started walking away with the box still running. Then it said, "Shy." I stopped and turned around. I asked, "Wait, are you shy?" And right after that it said, "Yeah." So, of course, I stayed longer. At one point I heard music in the distance. It sounded old-fashioned, almost classical, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere beyond the road, past the trees. Then the box said, "There's that sound again." That really got under my skin. Eventually, the responses started fading. I asked one last question, probably the biggest one on my mind. I asked if it could show itself in the same form as before, if it had been the black cat. The box brought up the machine and the box again, but I couldn't make sense of it. Then I opened another app that's supposed to detect human-shaped figures. I saw a few shapes, but honestly, it could have just been the trees. I don't want to pretend I know for sure. I was about to leave when I looked up from my phone, and there it was, the same black cat. It was walking toward me slowly, not like a normal cat wandering around. It looked like it had seen me and had chosen to come directly at me. It was thin and small, but somehow it looked bigger than it should have. Its movement reminded me of the goat thing from my dream, that same slow, wrong kind of motion, that same rocking walk. It never stopped staring at me. Then it sat down and watched me for a couple of minutes. After that, it ran into the woods near the tree. I thought that was bad enough, but then I saw it again, sitting near the U-shaped tree itself. Not directly under it, but close enough that it felt intentional. That was when I got genuinely scared. Part of me was fascinated because I thought, maybe I was right. Maybe this is connected. But another part of me just wanted to get out of there. There was something about the cat's face. I can't explain it. It looked less and less like a cat the longer I looked at it. So I left. I went back into my yard and tried to calm down. After a few minutes, I decided to walk back up the dirt road just to see if the cat was still there. I didn't think it would be. But it was following me. Slowly. The second I noticed it, that same dread filled my whole body. I looked down at my phone for just a moment, trying to figure out what to do. When I looked back up, the cat was gone. And there was nowhere for it to go. The road was too open. It couldn't have hidden that fast. And I had never seen it move quickly except for that one moment when it ran into the woods. So I ran back to my house. Then things got even stranger. When I came back outside, there were random cats all over my yard. A brown cat, another black cat, and a few others. But none of them were the same black cat I had been seeing. That one had a very specific look. One cat peeked around the side of my house and stared at me. I walked toward it and it vanished. I checked behind the buildings nearby, but there was no way it could have slipped under them or around them without me seeing. It was just gone. I went inside and told my sister everything. She asked, "Did you bring something home?" And I said, "I think I did." Later, she told me she heard a cat meowing outside. When she looked, she said it matched the one I had described, and then it disappeared before she could get close. By then it was dark, but I went outside again with the spirit box. I asked, "Is the cat trying to lure me back?" The response was, "It is." Right around then, I started seeing glowing dots in the woods. They weren't fireflies. They were brighter than that, almost sparkling. One of them kept flashing from the same spot in the trees, like it wanted me to walk toward it. And I almost did. Then I noticed more of them, almost like a little trail leading down the road toward the tree. At one point, the app said, "Look familiar." I looked around and noticed another tree near my house shaped almost like a tuning fork. It reminded me of the U-shaped tree down the road. I said something like, "Yeah, I remember. It looks like you, doesn't it?" The response was, "Yes, correct." After that, it got quiet for a while. Then it started mentioning someone named Micah. I don't remember exactly what was said, but the name came through more than once. Then it asked, "Can you help me?" And I got the feeling it wanted me to go back to the tree. At the same time, the glowing dots in the woods seemed brighter, and the ones down the road looked even more like a trail. That was when I went back inside. I was confused, scared, and honestly a little excited too, because part of me has always wanted to experience something paranormal. But when something actually seems to happen, it doesn't feel fun anymore. It feels heavy. While I was talking to my sister, I brought up the day she came with me when I touched the tree. That's when she suddenly said, "Wait, you know I've seen that cat before, right?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "When you went to touch the tree, the cat was there. It was watching you. That's why I didn't go down there with you." Then she told me something I didn't know. She said that when I walked toward the tree, the cat disappeared, then reappeared farther back in the woods, still staring at me. And that's where things stand now. Most of it happened a couple of days ago. Things have calmed down since then, but I still feel this strange pull to go back to the tree. At the same time, after everything that happened, I really don't think I should. I haven't seen that cat again yet. I don't know where it went. And I don't know if this was all one huge coincidence. or if I stumbled into something I should have left alone. Hey, I want to share with you a story that's been with me for most of my life. Something that's a little hard to explain, but has definitely shaped how I see the world. So, I grew up in Texas, lived there until I was 15, and then my family moved to New Mexico. But my experiences? They started way earlier, when I was just a kid, maybe around 5 years old, though my family tells me it actually began closer to 3. It all started at this little restaurant my family used to go to. I had to sit at this one particular table because, well, that's where my pet cat was. Now, here's the thing. My parents and my oldest sister thought my cat was imaginary at first, but I wasn't imagining it. I could see this cat, clear as day. And then it wasn't just that one. I started seeing more cats, but these other ones appeared at our house, not the restaurant. I can almost still feel the quiet hum of our kitchen, the soft clatter of dishes, and that odd sensation creeping over me. This feeling like I wasn't alone. In our house, the microwave sat in this little nook right next to where we did laundry and sometimes watched TV. It was a small space, but man, you could feel it there. Like someone was watching you, always. I'd get that feeling so strong it made my skin crawl, but nothing else would happen for years. Then, when I was about 12, after my sister moved out, the feeling changed. It followed me everywhere, all the way up the stairs to the second floor, right into my room. One morning, I was watching TV in my room before school. My phone was sitting right in the middle of my chair. There was no way it could just fall off on its own. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw it lift up and tumble to the floor. I blinked, thinking maybe I was imagining things, but I wasn't. It really happened. Another time, my mom and I were in her bathroom late at night. She has a shelf with all these glass perfume bottles lined up. We were about to leave, and she was reaching to turn the light off when one of the perfume bottles just fell off the shelf. It wasn't like someone had used it and set it down wrong. It was the middle of the night, and no one else was around. Little things like that happened. Hearing footsteps on the stairs when it was just me at home. Sure, stairs make noises, but these footsteps were different. Like someone was really walking up and down, and sometimes I could hear someone calling my name the way a parent might shout when they come home from the store. At night, it got worse. Sounds of someone walking right up to my bed, but no one was there. I used to have guinea pigs, and whenever I heard those footsteps, they'd freak out, squealing and darting around like crazy. It was as if whatever was in the house was irritated or angry. When we finally decided to move, that's when things really escalated. We were packing up, getting everything ready. Upstairs by our furnace door, we had this big metal star hanging. My parents told me they heard a loud bang in the middle of the night. They ran out of their room and saw the star swinging back and forth. Dad even went outside to check if someone was trying to break in, but there was no one there. A few minutes later, I heard a loud bang in my room and ran straight to my parents like any scared kid would. Mom told me about the star. Then there was this other night, just a few days before we were to move out. I woke up to the sound of someone trying to get into my room. I never lock my door, but it sounded like it was locked and someone was banging on it, frustrated, almost furious. After that, we moved to New Mexico and stayed at my Nana's house, which everyone in our family says is haunted. We're pretty sure it's family spirits, though. Let me back up a bit so you get a better picture. Before we moved in, my sister saw a man standing at the foot of her bed as a kid. Mom saw the furnace door open on its own. Nana would hear people rustling through papers, things moving, and voices talking when no one else was there. Dad heard a man yell in his ear, "Get out!" Even my little cousin was scared to walk down the long hallway by herself because she saw that same man standing there. When I was about 6 or 7, my great-grandma passed away. She used to be in a wheelchair, and you could always hear her rolling down the hall. When we visited Nana's, I slept on the couch instead of the pallet on the floor near my parents' bed. One night, Right before I fell asleep, I heard the familiar sound of a wheelchair rolling past the living room. It was eerie, but also oddly comforting. When we finally moved in, Nana let me put one of her porcelain dolls in my room. Now, I've never liked dolls. They tend to creep me out, but this one didn't bother me at first. It sat on a shelf, but soon I noticed it would be facing a different way every time I came home from school. Sometimes I'd smell that old-fashioned powder ladies wear, faint but unmistakable. One night, around 10 p.m., while I was brushing my teeth, I heard a man say my name. Haley. I thought maybe Dad was calling me, so I went to his room and answered, but Mom was awake and said Dad was asleep and no one had called me. Weeks passed quietly, but then I saw something. While on my phone, I glimpsed a little girl standing in my closet. After that, I never left my closet door open. Then, one night, I saw that man again, standing next to my bed. I told Mom, and she said it was the same man many in the family had seen. Maybe it was my imagination, but no one had described him before. We moved out once we found a place to rent. At first, nothing strange happened, but then, the feeling returned. Someone calling my name when I was home alone. One time, I was on the phone with my sister, and she heard me respond because I thought Mom and Dad had come home. I looked out my window. No cars were there. Things got stranger. One night I was up late, went to the kitchen for a drink, and on my way back I heard a woman whisper clearly, "Shh, she's coming. She can hear us," repeated over and over. I followed the voice to Mom's open bedroom door. I asked if she was awake, and she mumbled back, half asleep. We both started seeing shadows in the corners of our eyes. Once, I was on the couch and Mom was in her bedroom. Our rooms are right next to each other. Mom came out, looked into my room, and saw the back of me sitting in my chair. But I was never in my room that night. There's no way I could have gotten to the couch before her. She was so freaked out she had to look twice. Months later, we moved into a house my partner bought. Nothing too weird happened there, just things going missing and then reappearing after days or weeks. Now I'm 21, living in Louisiana for almost 3 years. My boyfriend and I rent a house. At first, nothing strange happened, even when my 2 stepsons were here every other week. But when I got pregnant, things started again. The baby swing where I put my youngest stepson would turn on by itself. It made me uneasy. My daughter was born 6 months ago, and the feeling that someone's watching me has only grown stronger. I've even seen a little boy peeking out of my stepson's room while he was sleeping, and there were 2 shadows standing next to my daughter's crib. My boyfriend doesn't believe in any of this, but one night he heard the bathroom sink turn on and off just as I walked out of our bedroom. Luckily, my youngest stepson, who's now 1, and my daughter don't seem scared by whatever is here. So, that's my story so far. A lifetime of whispers, shadows, and that unshakable feeling of being watched. I don't know what it all means, but it's part of who I am now. Hey, I want to share a strange experience that my brothers and I went through one night. It's a bit eerie, but I'll tell it as it happened, every detail included. So, picture this. It's around 4 in the morning. The house is dead silent. Everyone's fast asleep. Suddenly, my brothers hear this flapping noise in their room, like wings fluttering softly but unmistakably. The sound seemed to be right above our youngest brother, almost like something was hovering over him. Now, my younger brother, half asleep and confused, reaches up and swats at the air, thinking it's just a fly or some harmless bug. But here's where it gets weird. He actually feels something crawling on his blanket. That startled him enough to throw the blanket off quickly and flip on the bedroom light, ducking down to see what on earth could be causing that noise. Our youngest brother had been woken up by the sudden commotion. He peeks out from under his blanket, pulling it up to cover most of his face, clearly scared it might bite or do something harmful. They both start looking around the room, trying to spot the source of the flapping and crawling sensation. And then, to their shock, they realize it's a bat. Not just any bat. They couldn't tell the kind because it was too dark and fast. So they called out to our parents for help. Our dad was the first one awake, and he headed into their room to check things out. But as soon as he entered, the bat flew right into their room. Dad quickly told my brothers to shut their door and stay put while he handled the situation himself. Now, here's where my dad gets serious. With the bat flying around in the room, he calmly yet firmly said something like, "If you're a good spirit, be kind and don't cause any trouble. Please leave the house peacefully. But if you're a bad spirit, know that you're not welcome here, and I will remove you by force." After he said that, something strange happened. The bat seemed to grow in size, larger than before, almost as if it was mocking him. My dad got angry and grabbed something. He swatted hard, and the bat's wing got badly injured, torn almost in half, according to him. He quickly caught the bat. From my room in the basement, I could hear Dad stomping angrily as he stormed to the front door. He flung it open and threw the bat out onto the cold cement sidewalk leading up to our house. I could almost hear it twitching on the rough concrete. Dad wanted to record the bat on his phone, but then he realized his phone was back in his room. He hurried to grab it, but when he came back outside, the bat was gone. Completely vanished. No blood stains, no sign it had ever been there. Dad even used his phone's flashlight to search the grass nearby, but found nothing unusual. It was as if the bat had never existed, just a figment of their imagination. He spent the next few hours pacing around, threatening that if the bat came back, he'd kill it for real this time, before finally going back to bed and heading to work later that morning. Later that day, my brothers told our grandma about the incident. She put on a mask and started searching every inch of the outside of the house, carefully checking for any holes or places the bat might have gotten in. They searched inside the house too. But here's the thing. There was no way for the bat to have entered. All doors and windows were tightly shut. The only time a door was opened was when Mom came home earlier. But my brothers had been up late playing video games and would have heard the bat way before that if it had slipped in then. For the next few days, our parents and grandma talked to relatives who practiced shamanism, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it just a regular bat? Or something more? Maybe a spirit? But even now, weeks later, we still don't have a proper answer. That bat, whether real or supernatural, left a mysterious mark on our family. A midnight visitor that came and went without explanation. Hey there. I want to share something really personal and intense that happened to me. It's about a paranormal experience that still haunts me, even after all these years. See, I've always been a bit different when it comes to sensing things beyond the normal. Ever since I was a kid, I've had these abilities. Not the kind you see in movies, but real, raw sensitivity to things that other people just don't notice. It comes from my family, a long line of people with spiritual gifts. My grandparents, for instance, were known to be shamans and mediums. This wasn't just stories, it was a part of who we were. So naturally, I became the one who could see or feel these entities first whenever we moved into a new place. I guess you could say I was a magnet for it all. Growing up, I learned to block these things out because, frankly, I didn't want that kind of attention. Some spirits were just curious, trying to get noticed, but others were downright sinister. I was lucky to have the strength to ward off the bad ones or escape them before they could really hurt me. But then we moved into this one house. This house was different. It wasn't just a little haunted or spooky, it was a battleground. The spirits there were powerful and malevolent. They didn't just try to scare us, they tried to break us down. Physically, emotionally, financially. That house almost drove me to the edge, to a place where I felt like giving up on life itself. It was an old Spanish-style house with 2 bedrooms and a dark history that no one outside of our family or neighbors knew about. Rumors whispered about terrible things that happened there, involving the former owners and their maid. But what truly made it terrifying was the entities that openly revealed themselves to everyone. My mom, her partner, me, even visitors. Everyone who came in left feeling uneasy, scared, or with stories of their own encounters. We had 3 main entities that made themselves known: a shadowy man and 2 female spirits. Over time, even though their presence filled us with dread, we got used to them. We could sense their intentions, their energy, and learn how to live with them. Except for one. There was this one entity that defied everything I knew. It was invisible, but terrifying, and the memory of that encounter still chills me to this day. One weekend afternoon, I woke up from a deep, dreamless sleep. I had recently switched rooms with my mom, so I was still getting used to the new space. When I opened my eyes, I was a bit disoriented, trying to shake off the grogginess. I glanced at my digital clock and was shocked to see it was past 3 p.m. Wow, I slept that long? I thought to myself. I tried to stretch, lifting my arms, but suddenly something was wrong. A heavy pressure pressed down on my chest and neck, spreading quickly to my limbs. I was frozen, unable to move. And then I felt it. There was this weight on my right side, something taking shape even though I couldn't see it. It felt like a hairless, bald head pressed into my neck, right under my jaw. I could almost feel its bony face, its chin digging into my collarbone and chest. Its arms, thin, scrawny, and cold, wrapped tightly around my body, gripping my arms and thighs with a vice-like strength. The skin was unlike anything I've ever felt. Not soft, not warm, but leathery and tense, stretched over wiry sinew and bone. It reminded me of how Gollum from Lord of the Rings might feel if he wrapped himself around you in a suffocating hug. I couldn't see it, but in my mind's eye I caught a glimpse. Gangly, pale, almost corpse-like arms gripping me. The feeling was suffocating, disgusting, filled with a negative energy that made my skin crawl and my heart race. I couldn't breathe. Panic surged through me, but then it shifted to anger. How dare this thing invade my space, touch me without permission? I struggled, probably looking insane as I tried to wrestle this invisible creature off me. At one point, I managed to shove at its torso, and I felt it exhale cold air onto my neck. The revulsion I felt in that moment is hard to describe, like nothing I've ever experienced before. I cursed and prayed like my life depended on it, because honestly, I thought it might. The fight felt endless, but finally, I got enough movement in my left hand to push its bony jaw away from my neck, multiple times, until I could shove it off entirely. Its weight dropped beside me on the bed. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself off the bed and ran straight to my mom's room. She was on a phone call, negotiating something heated, but as soon as she saw me, she ended the call and hurriedly asked what was wrong. I told her about the thing, the invisible creature that had just held me down. Her face went pale, then angry. She grabbed a bottle of holy water and stormed into my room, shouting curses at whatever was there. She doused my bed with holy water, and after that, I never felt that presence again. Or at least, I don't remember encountering it more than once. This all happened just a little over a week after I had to switch rooms with my mom because of another terrifying experience. The Shadow Man, this hulking 7-foot-tall incubus-like figure, had started watching me more closely, even getting physical by laying on me while I was awake. Up until then, it had only appeared in my dreams, but that day, it crossed a boundary. So after that encounter, I moved rooms, hoping for some peace. But then, just a week later, this invisible, suffocating thing attacked me, and I still don't understand why. Why would the Shadow Man's presence be followed so closely by this strange, golem-like entity? What did it want? Was it connected to the other spirits in the house? I've spent years trying to figure it out, but the answers just aren't there. I'm sharing this story because maybe, just maybe, someone out there has experienced something similar or can offer some insight. It's scary to admit these things, but I believe that speaking them aloud is part of healing. Living in that house changed me, left marks that aren't visible but run deep. But I'm stronger now, and I'm still here telling the tale, hoping it helps someone else feel less alone in the darkness. Hey, I want to share with you a story about a peculiar experience in my home, something that stayed with me for years, and I think you'll find it as strange and touching as I do. It all starts with a simple electric doorbell I installed upstairs, at the entrance to our upper floor suite. I put it there mostly because my older daughter, who was quite the little mischief maker, thought it was hilarious to ring it before sneaking into my quarters. But then, well, the doorbell started ringing on its own. At first, we thought it was a glitch, just some odd electrical hiccup. But as time passed, it became clear it wasn't random at all. See, the bell would chime at very specific moments, like when the kids did something I had explicitly told them not to do, or when a TV program showed something scary to them and I could see their little faces scrunch up in fear. It was almost as if the bell was the house's way of keeping us all in check. It sounded more like a subtle warning, a reminder that something wasn't quite right. One day, I was upstairs, listening to some music, just trying to relax. One of our cats was fixated on the open door, sitting there completely still, eyes wide and unblinking, as if it saw something invisible to us. The poor thing was petrified for a long moment, then suddenly darted away, diving under a chest of drawers. That's the instant the doorbell rang, and the song instantly shifted to "Can't Get My Eyes Off You," as if on cue. It was at that moment I started to suspect who, or what, might be behind these eerie happenings. We grew so accustomed to this presence that, honestly, I would often open the door and say, "Come in, dear," whenever I heard the bell's distinct ring. It became almost comforting in a strange way. Sometimes, one of the kids would look at me with wide eyes and say, "I didn't do anything this time," and we'd both laugh nervously. But as comforting as this ghostly visitor was, it wasn't the only presence in our home. Now, a bit about me. I was battling depression, slowly feeling better but still haunted by dark moments. There were nights when, without any clear reason, I'd feel so overwhelmed that the only thing I could do was curl up on the floor in a tight fetal position and just wait it out. The idea of stepping outside made my heart race with anxiety, and I'd rush back inside, desperate for the safety of my home. One night, I honestly don't remember everything, maybe a mix of pills and alcohol. I was in a very bad place. My older daughter, who was just 7 then, called my parents. By the time they got there, about half an hour later, I was talking to the furniture and even my watch. They told me I was planning to go buy Christmas presents in the middle of the night, wearing a coat over my pajamas, sitting on the bed with knives laid around me. It was so surreal. The next morning, I woke up in a hospital, labeled as the depressive patient. Thankfully, after several doctor visits, they reassured my parents it wasn't a suicide attempt, but those days were incredibly dark. Another time, though, I remember very little except a pounding headache that felt like it was going to split my skull. I stumbled down the stairs, barely able to stand. Our nanny was so scared she called my parents again, and once more, I found myself in the hospital. I kept pleading with the nurses to open the windows. I craved fresh air, but they refused and wouldn't let me open them. It wasn't until later I learned why. We were on the 8th floor, and this time, the hospital staff truly believed I was suicidal. My partner came and stayed with us, showing incredible patience during those difficult days. Fast forward a bit. We took a vacation to the beach, and those sunny, salty days did wonders for my spirit. When we returned, my doctor lowered my medication dose. I wasn't as afraid to leave the house anymore, even inviting a few friends over now and then. One friend, who had never been inside my house before, was visibly impressed. He told me he'd always wondered what it looked like inside because he'd passed by so many times, and the house had always caught his eye. He even admitted the ghost stories he'd heard added to his fascination. Curious, I asked him what stories he meant. I knew the house once belonged to a very intellectual former president, and the neighborhood was known as a bohemian hub full of artists and thinkers. That was part of why I'd chosen it. He shared an old tale about how many intellectuals used to gather there, discussing books, poetry, music, and politics. After the house was abandoned for some time, rumors started spreading that it was haunted. People claimed to see lights flickering and hear voices, especially coming from the room that's now my library. One particularly chilling story was about a group of teenagers who dared each other to sneak inside at midnight. They climbed over the wall and entered the backyard, but almost immediately, the 6 kids started feeling an overwhelming fear. Still, one brave soul said he would go inside alone. He slipped in through the basement and climbed the stairs to the corner room with the 4 large windows, the very room where the eerie lights appeared. The others waited anxiously, but he never came back. His brother, part of the group, grew worried and tried to convince the others to join him, but no one wanted to. Eventually, he went inside alone. He heard voices and was convinced squatters had taken over the place and attacked his brother. Despite the fear, he pressed on toward the room. When he arrived, everything went silent. There, on the floor, was the shape of his brother. He flicked on his flashlight and saw what he initially thought was a corpse, face soaked in blood. He screamed, calling out for the others, but they fled instead of helping. Miraculously, the brother was unharmed, just bleeding from the nose. He remembered walking toward the strange, glowing lights and hearing the old-fashioned voices of people dressed in vintage clothing having an intense conversation. And then, nothing. This story spread quickly, and many people avoided the house at night for years. Eventually, a grandson of the former intellectual president renovated the place and lived there for a while, and then it passed to his niece, who finally sold it to me. Only then did I truly understand the reason behind the strange price of the house. Thinking about my daughter's occasional nosebleeds, I still get chills down my spine. So, that's the story of the bell that rang when no one was there, and the house that holds more than just memories. It's alive with whispers of the past, and a presence that watches over us in its own mysterious way. You know, over time, things around the house started to feel almost normal again. I was getting stronger, putting in more hours at work, and the girls, they were growing up so fast. We'd all gotten used to the little odd noises at night, the strange doorbell rings coming from upstairs when no one was there. It became part of our rhythm. My older daughter, Lily, she'd just avoid the downstairs hallway altogether, like she sensed something there she didn't want to confront. But the littlest one, Emma, she was already walking and talking, and honestly, she was talking to someone none of us could see. At first, I thought it was just a typical imaginary friend, you know? But then, things started getting weird enough that I realized it wasn't just pretend. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table typing something up on my laptop, and I used the word widow. Emma looked back at me with those big, curious eyes and asked, "Mommy, what does widow mean?" I explained it gently, but I just brushed it off, thinking maybe I just mumbled the word aloud without meaning to. But then, more strange things kept happening. Emma was super jealous one day and blurted out angrily, "I know you were kissing Daddy last night. Don't do it." I asked her how she knew that, and she told me her special friend had told her. There was no way she could have known that. Another time, I heard her running up the stairs, tumbling and almost falling. I was in the living room and rushed over to catch her. I told her firmly, "Be careful, Emma. You're not supposed to run on the stairs." She looked to my left, eyes narrowed and voice angry. "Why did you tell her?" I was confused and asked her what she meant. She said she was sure he had told me she was running. She kept scolding the air, like she was arguing with someone invisible. I told her I'd heard her, and she just glanced over my left shoulder and said, "Okay." One day, she proudly declared she was a model, and her stage name was Jelly Belly. I couldn't help but laugh. When she asked why, I told her it sounded funny, and she shouted at her invisible friend, "That's a dumb prank, you're mean." Emma was a whirlwind in every sense. She was always making messes, climbing on furniture, and had so much energy that keeping up with her was exhausting. I'd hired a new nanny by then because during the afternoons, when Lily was home from school, Emma needed someone to watch her full time. Many times I'd get frustrated with her, telling her to be careful or asking her to put her toys away. She'd often burst into tears, especially since scolding her meant breaking up her playtime. She had this habit of going to the bathroom and shutting the door behind her. I'd hear her muttering, explaining why she was upset with me. Then there'd be a silence followed by firm little protests. No, I'm not going to. It's not fair." But after a while, she'd open the door, come into my arms, and apologize, always sneaking a quick glance behind her as if checking someone was there. I'd hug her tight, and for a little while, she'd behave better. I won't lie, that ghost, whoever he was oddly helpful in calming her down. One day, I was leafing through an old photo album, and Emma came up behind me. She pointed at a picture and said softly, "That's him. That's my friend." I looked closer. It was a photo of my ex-boyfriend, someone who had died far too young. At that moment, everything clicked into place. So I had to get used to the idea that my little girl was talking to my late boyfriend. But then, Emma started showing some really unusual behavior. Sometimes when she met new people, she couldn't stop poking them. I remember this one time, a good friend of mine, a sweet, sensitive guy, came over. I let him into the living room and went to the kitchen to heat some water for tea. When I came back, Emma was sitting in an armchair, playing with a toy, completely ignoring him. I asked, "Did you at least say hello?" She looked confused and asked, "Do you see him too?" Then she stood up and poked his cheek before finally saying, "Hi." We enrolled her in ballet classes, trying to give her something like her sister had. But the teachers told me that sometimes she made other kids uncomfortable because she'd get too close and poke them randomly. Thankfully, ballet wasn't her true passion. Another day, we were at my parents' country house when some friends arrived with their 4 children. Emma fixated on the youngest girl and, when she thought I wasn't watching, poked her in the face. I told her to stop, but then I saw her licking the little girl's arm. I quickly told her not to do that. She told me she wasn't sure if some people were visible to everyone or only to her, so she had to check. Later, my mom mentioned that the little girl had actually died briefly at birth and had to be resuscitated. I never checked the backstories of the other kids at ballet or my sensitive friend, but I think some people have a certain something that makes Emma question what's real and what's not, blurring the lines between ghosts and living souls in her mind. Things started getting even stranger. The nanny hated being alone in the house because she heard footsteps behind her and someone whispering her name in her ear. I'm sure I didn't help matters. A few times, she rang the upstairs doorbell, and when I opened the door, I screamed. Not because there was a ghost, but because it was a real person standing there. startling me so much I forgot the usual eerie expectations. There was this one particularly annoying journalist who came over for an interview. Every time he asked questions unrelated to art, the microphone would cut out. I was so baffled that I started laughing nervously, which only irritated him more. Eventually, we managed to finish the interview, but a friend of mine who worked at the magazine told me later he thought I was playing a prank on the journalist and held a grudge. Then, there was that unforgettable Christmas Eve. My partner had just arrived and was walking upstairs when the lights on the staircase suddenly went out. He was getting used to his phone dying at my place, as if the batteries just gave up. But that night, he didn't bring his charger. He shrugged and said, "No big deal, it's an old house with old wiring, nothing paranormal here." Just then, the lights flicked back on, and the doorbell rang right in front of us. "Okay, my mistake," he said. We were all just getting used to these little quirks. My partner was convinced the house was targeting him. Lights going off when he arrived, objects disappearing only to reappear in the strangest places. One time, I was making chili con carne. I diced tomatoes on the cutting board and was focused on adding spices when I noticed a clear handprint on the board, right in the middle of the mess. It was like someone leaned their hand there. I thought it was my partner, who was often distracted. I got a little annoyed, imagining him touching everything with tomato-covered hands. When I asked him, he swore he hadn't done it, not even by accident. I insisted and compared his hand to the print. It was definitely smaller than the handprint. I tried to recreate it myself, but couldn't get anything similar. Then I noticed something peculiar. The pinky finger in the handprint was slightly twisted. I remembered my late boyfriend had injured his pinky playing sports. I took pictures, hoping to find a logical explanation later, but I never did. Living here, with all these whispers, shadows, and tiny mysteries, has been a journey. It's a strange blend of fear, curiosity, and an odd sense of comfort. Because even though the ghosts are real and sometimes unsettling, they're also a part of our story now, woven into the fabric of our family's life in ways I never imagined. You know, there was this peculiar stretch of time when things in that old house of mine just seemed to spiral into something wilder than ever before. It was like the atmosphere itself thickened, and the house wasn't just creaking or whispering. It was acting out. Around then, the nanny I had started really hating being alone in that place. She told me she kept hearing footsteps right behind her, and sometimes someone whispering her name so softly, like a breath right next to her ear. I guess I didn't exactly make things easier for her. There were these moments, 2 or 3 times, when she rang the door upstairs, probably needing some company or reassurance, and I'd open it. But instead of the usual ghostly figure she expected, it was just me standing there. And every time she'd scream, startled by the very living person she thought she might finally see. I felt bad but couldn't help but smile because, honestly, the tension in that house was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. One day, there was this journalist who came by. Oh, he was something else. Annoying and way too self-conscious, always trying to pry out more than just art talk from me. But every time he veered off topic, like asking about anything besides my work, his microphone would mysteriously stop working. No matter how much he fiddled with it, the darn thing just cut out. I was watching him, utterly puzzled, and I couldn't help but laugh nervously. It was one of those laughs that's equal parts disbelief and a bit of fear. The poor guy looked downright annoyed, like he thought I was pulling some prank on him. After a lot of fiddling and awkward pauses, we finally got through a decent interview. Later on, one of my editor friends, who was also a buddy, told me he thought I was messing with the journalist and that the guy held a grudge. Honestly, I don't blame him. Living in that house messes with your head enough as it is. Then came that Christmas Eve, a night I still remember clearly. My partner arrived at the house, walking up the creaky old stairs, and suddenly, the lights cut out. Just like that. Now he was getting used to his phone battery dying the moment he stepped through my door, like some invisible force drained the power. But that night, he didn't even bother pulling it out. Instead, he said out loud, almost trying to convince himself, "It's just an old house. The wiring's probably shot. Nothing paranormal here." And right then, just as if the house was mocking him, the lights flickered back on. Then, almost immediately, the doorbell rang right in front of us. He chuckled and said, "Okay, maybe I was wrong." We were slowly getting used to these little quirks, or maybe curses. My partner even started feeling like the house was targeting him specifically. Lights going out when he arrived, things disappearing only to show up in the most impossible places later on. It was like the house was playing tricks on him. I remember one particular evening when I was making chili con carne. I had diced fresh tomatoes on the cutting board, ready to throw them into the pot with beans and meat. I was completely focused on getting the seasoning just right, the perfect balance of spices, and I wasn't paying attention to anything else. When I finally looked down, I noticed a clear handprint right there on the cutting board, smudged into the tomatoes. It was like someone had leaned on it with a perfect palm-sized mark, the fingers distinct, the shape unmistakable. I immediately thought it was my partner. He was often distracted, always moving around the house without noticing what he touched. I got a bit frustrated because I figured he hadn't even realized he'd smeared tomato juice everywhere, and probably went around touching doors and walls with his messy hand. When I asked him about it, though, he swore he hadn't done it, not even by accident. I pressed him, and he put his hand next to the mark. It was definitely smaller than the handprint on the board. Just to be sure, I put my own hand next to it, and the print was larger than mine. Going back to my old skeptical self, I thought maybe I'd done it while scraping the board with the knife, but no matter how many times I tried to replicate it, nothing looked like that clear handprint. Then, I noticed something odd. The tip of the pinky finger in the print was twisted, a small detail I hadn't noticed before. It hit me. My late boyfriend had a pinky finger that was slightly crooked after a sports injury. I took pictures of the cutting board to try and figure this out later, hoping for a logical explanation. But none ever came. And then there were the witches. No, not real ones, but 2 doll witches hanging from the ceiling as decorations. My older daughter loved teasing her little sister, so she told her the prettier doll witch was a representation of herself, while the other was her sister's. I didn't love how she kept telling her little sister she was the smart and beautiful one. It felt a little mean. Jokingly, I told my daughters that if I were one of those doll witches, I'd be so mad I'd start moving on my own. And can you believe it? One of those dolls started spinning all by itself. I mean, it was indoors, no open windows, no fans, and only one of the witches moved. I laughed. It was so absurd it felt like a prank. But my girls stared at it, wide-eyed and scared. My youngest looked up at me and whispered, "Mom, make them stop." I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just said, "Okay, stop now." And wouldn't you know it, it stopped. They were amazed and asked how I did it, but I swore it wasn't me. Over the next few days, the witches began spinning more and more, completely out of the blue. Usually they stopped when I told them to, but each time it took longer and longer. The nanny saw it a couple of times and started freaking out. She was really on edge. My partner, ever the rational thinker, suggested it might be some kind of telekinesis. But I couldn't make them spin on purpose, and they even spun when I wasn't around. We started taking the whole thing more seriously, especially because the 2 witches could spin in opposite directions at the same time, sometimes speeding up and slowing down, stuff that defied everything I knew about physics. It freaked out my kids too. Eventually, we decided to take those witches down and put them away. By then, I found myself diving into ghost stories and paranormal research, curious despite my skepticism. The so-called orbs in photos always seemed underwhelming to me. Just dust particles caught in the light, surely. But as I talked to more people, some asked questions that made me pause and rethink. Like, why did orbs only show up in certain places? Why would one picture be filled with them and another, taken seconds later, show none? I started paying closer attention to the photos I took, especially the ones with my kids. They were often surrounded by these orbs. One picture really caught my eye. It was a set of 2 photos, taken automatically about 10 seconds apart. In the first, the 3 of us, me and my daughters, were smiling, although my little one had her eyes closed. In the second, the 3 of us looked happy and alert, but there was this strange gray shape hovering just next to my youngest daughter. It wasn't just an orb. It looked like a moving white figure, a shadow almost. Another photo made my heart skip. My smallest sitting by the bed, and above her, in the corner where the wall met the ceiling, there was this blue shade. At first, I thought it was some smudge on the wall or a spot in the photograph. But it wasn't. My partner pointed out that it was exactly where the doll witches used to hang. That moment made me realize this house held secrets far beyond what I could understand. Whispers in the dark, shadows that lingered, and little signs that maybe, just maybe, we weren't alone in that old haunted house. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me a while back. I usually don't believe in stuff like Bigfoot or cryptids. Aliens maybe, but even then, I'm skeptical. I'm 23 now, and for most of my life, I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But recently, my girlfriend and I moved closer to some dense forest land here in Michigan. It's beautiful out here. Deer, foxes, coyotes, all living their lives in the wild. I always loved the sounds of the woods, the rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. But one night, something happened that has completely changed how I see this place. It was around 11 p.m. when I pulled up to our little stretch of houses nestled near the forest. I noticed all our neighbors had their porch lights on and were peering out their windows, scanning the darkness. At first, I thought maybe a dog had gotten loose, or there was some animal causing a stir. I slowed down as I pulled into our long driveway, curiosity growing. Then, right at the foot of the driveway, I saw it. This creature, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its legs reminded me of a deer, strong and muscular, but its coat was different. Instead of the sleek, short fur deer have, this one had a reddish-brown coat, thick and long, almost like a fox's fur, but much denser. I shifted my gaze upward and froze. Its head was covered in fur too, but shaped oddly, like a human's head, elongated, with long ears resembling those of a hunting dog. But here's the weirdest part. I didn't see eyes, no mouth, just this eerie, faceless head staring into the night. Before I could process more, it bolted. It ran alongside a mailbox by the road, the kind that reaches up to my shoulder. I'm 6'2", and this creature's back was even with the top of the mailbox, even though it was on all fours. It must have been over 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and it was incredibly lean, almost gaunt, and it had no tail. That was the moment I saw it, and honestly, I couldn't explain what it was. For days afterward, I told myself it was just a deer with some kind of disease or mutation, maybe mange making its fur look strange. But then, a few nights later, things started going downhill for me. 3 nights after that encounter, I couldn't fall asleep at all. I was tossing and turning until dawn, and when the sun finally rose, I was exhausted, but tried to push through. I thought the lack of sleep was messing with me, but even after I caught a decent 7 hours of rest, the weird symptoms stuck around. It started with dizzy spells, these little episodes lasting about half a minute. The strange thing was, they only happened when I was trying to focus on something, looking for my keys, checking both ways before crossing the street, even searching for my phone when I knew exactly where it was. It was like my brain just glitched for a moment. Then came the images, flashbacks or hallucinations, I'm not sure. I'd see myself in accidents, my phone catching fire while charging, the battery exploding, getting hit by a car as it backed out in a parking lot. These images were vivid and terrifying, and often I'd forget them shortly after, like my mind was trying to block them out. And the nosebleeds started. I've only had one before in my life, when I broke my nose as a kid. But now, twice, out of nowhere, my nose just started gushing blood. I'm sharing this because it's been haunting me. That creature, whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it left something with me. I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind or if there's something more going on here. I still see those neighbors staring out their windows sometimes, and I wonder if they saw it too. The woods don't feel the same anymore. I'm cautious now, and honestly, a little scared of what might be lurking just beyond the trees. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me a while back. I usually don't believe in stuff like Bigfoot or cryptids, aliens maybe, but even then, I'm skeptical. I'm 23 now, and for most of my life, I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But recently, my girlfriend and I moved closer to some dense forest land here in Michigan. It's beautiful out here. Deer, foxes, coyotes, all living their lives in the wild. I always loved the sounds of the woods, the rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. But one night, something happened that has completely changed how I see this place. It was around 11 p.m. when I pulled up to our little stretch of houses nestled near the forest. I noticed all our neighbors had their porch lights on and were peering out their windows, scanning the darkness. At first, I thought maybe a dog had gotten loose, or there was some animal causing a stir. I slowed down as I pulled into our long driveway, curiosity growing. Then, right at the foot of the driveway, I saw it. This creature, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its legs reminded me of a deer, strong and muscular, but its coat was different. Instead of the sleek, short fur deer have, this one had a reddish-brown coat, thick and long, almost like a fox's fur but much denser. I shifted my gaze upward and froze. Its head was covered in fur too, but shaped oddly, like a human's head, elongated, with long ears resembling those of a hunting dog. But here's the weirdest part. I didn't see eyes, no mouth, just this eerie, faceless head staring into the night. Before I could process more, it bolted. It ran alongside a mailbox by the road, the kind that reaches up to my shoulder. I'm 6'2", and this creature's back was even with the top of the mailbox, even though it was on all fours. It must have been over 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and it was incredibly lean, almost gaunt. And it had no tail. That was the moment I saw it, and honestly, I couldn't explain what it was. For days afterward, I told myself it was just a deer with some kind of disease or mutation, maybe mange making its fur look strange. But then, a few nights later, things started going downhill for me. 3 nights after that encounter, I couldn't fall asleep at all. I was tossing and turning until dawn, and when the sun finally rose, I was exhausted, but tried to push through. I thought the lack of sleep was messing with me, but even after I caught a decent 7 hours of rest, the weird symptoms stuck around. It started with dizzy spells, these little episodes lasting about half a minute. The strange thing was, they only happened when I was trying to focus on something, looking for my keys, checking both ways before crossing the street, even searching for my phone when I knew exactly where it was. It was like my brain just glitched for a moment. Then came the images, flashbacks or hallucinations, I'm not sure. I'd see myself in accidents, my phone catching fire while charging, the battery exploding, getting hit by a car as it backed out in a parking lot. These images were vivid and terrifying, and often I'd forget them shortly after, like my mind was trying to block them out. And the nosebleeds started. I've only had one before in my life, when I broke my nose as a kid. But now, twice, out of nowhere, my nose just started gushing blood. I'm sharing this because it's been haunting me. That creature, whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it left something with me. I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind or if there's something more going on here. I still see those neighbors staring out their windows sometimes, and I wonder if they saw it too. The woods don't feel the same anymore. I'm cautious now, and honestly, a little scared of what might be lurking just beyond the trees. This happened back in 2009, during one of the roughest stretches of my life. I had just ended things with my ex after finding out she'd been cheating, and honestly, I couldn't handle being in the apartment with her anymore. Every room felt too full of what had happened, so I packed a few things and went to stay at my best friend's place for a while. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. My stomach was in knots. I kept feeling like I was going to be sick, tossing around in bed, trying to calm myself down and failing at it. Eventually, I got up and went to the bathroom. I remember sitting there, looking down at the floor, crying quietly, just completely drained. The bathroom door was right next to the toilet, close enough that my foot was maybe several inches from the bottom of it. And while I was staring at the floor, I saw something come in from under the door. It was a hand. A black, hairy hand with long nails. It slid slowly under the door and reached toward my foot. I don't mean it appeared for half a second and vanished. I saw it clearly. The fingers came forward like it was trying to touch me. I yanked my foot back so fast, and when I did, the hand pulled back too, but not in a startled way. It was calm, slow. I stood up immediately and backed away from the door, just frozen, trying to understand what I had just seen. Then I heard heavy footsteps outside the bathroom. They moved away from the door quickly, like someone walking off down the hall. I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like forever. I was terrified to open the door, even though I had heard the footsteps leave. My friend's room was just outside the bathroom, but still, I couldn't make myself move right away. Eventually, I ran out and went straight to the bedroom. I woke my friend up and started asking, "Did you just come to the bathroom? Were you messing with me?" But they had been dead asleep, completely confused. They had no idea what I was talking about. The part I remember most is the fingers. I can still see them in my mind even now. They looked almost like gorilla fingers in color and texture, dark and rough-looking, with hair covering them. Not thick, bushy hair, though. You could still see the skin underneath. The shape was different, too. They weren't stubby. They were thinner, more human-shaped. And the nails were black, long, and pointed. The strange thing is, even before that night, I had always felt something in the back part of that house. I would do laundry there sometimes, even during the day, and I always had this uncomfortable feeling like I was being watched. The air felt heavy back there. I used to tell myself I was just imagining it, that I was stressed or tired or letting my mind run wild. But after that night, I couldn't explain it away anymore. I know what I saw. I know it was real. I just don't know what it was, and I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't pulled my foot away. For years, I kept it mostly to myself. I didn't even tell my best friend until much later. When I finally did, they looked at me, and said their sister had always sworn there was something back there too. Apparently, that was the reason she never wanted to sleep in her own room, but everyone thought she was just being dramatic. That part still gets to me. Because when it happened, I was scared, absolutely. But strangely, it didn't feel evil. It didn't feel like it wanted to hurt me. It felt more like something was there, something I wasn't supposed to understand, reaching out from a place I couldn't see. It's been all these years, and I still think about it. I've experienced strange things in other places since then, but nothing like that. Nothing that stayed with me the same way. And I still don't know what reached for me from under that door. I don't really like calling myself spiritual. I'm not even sure that's the right word for it. But I've always felt like my mind works in a way I don't fully understand. For most of my life, I've had dreams that feel different from ordinary dreams. They're usually about people or animals close to me, and they tend to happen anywhere from a week to a month before an illness, a death, or some kind of major event. The strange part is that they're often symbolic at first. I wake up confused, feeling like the dream meant something, but I don't understand it until later. Then, when something happens, the details suddenly line up in a way that leaves me cold. One of the first dreams like this was about my pet rat, Mango. About a month before he died, I kept dreaming that he was slowly sinking into the earth, like he was decomposing into the ground. In the dream, the bones of his little head were covered in flowers. I woke up with this awful feeling that something was wrong inside his head. A month later, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Eventually, he passed away. Then there was my rat, Marble. Around 8 weeks before he died, I dreamed that he was dying in my arms. In the dream, there was an arrow through his right eye, and the eye looked injured and ulcerated. 8 weeks later, he died in my arms on the sofa. About an hour before he passed, his right eye suddenly ulcerated. I still remember the shock of seeing it and realizing I had already seen something like it in the dream. Another one was my rat, Milo. A week before he died, I dreamed I was holding him and accidentally dropped him 3 times. Each time, I managed to catch him before he hit the ground. But on the 4th drop, he slipped away from me and fell into this endless universe beneath us. A week later, Milo suddenly became ill. After we got back from the vet, I was holding him in one arm while calling my girlfriend with the other. While I was on the phone, he suddenly jolted out of my arms. It happened 3 times, and each time I caught him. Then I realized what was happening. It looked like a final death jolt. Seconds later, he was gone. What makes those dreams even harder to explain is that none of my rats had obvious signs of illness before I dreamed about them. There wasn't anything I consciously noticed that could have made me expect it. There was also a dream about my sister's horse. About 2 weeks before she passed away, I dreamed I was standing in a field with a chestnut horse. One of my sister's horses was chestnut-colored, so I remembered that detail clearly. In the dream, I was wiping the horse's backside with tissues. I woke up feeling like it was one of those dreams again, but I couldn't make sense of it. It felt too strange and specific. 2 weeks later, my mom called and said there was bad news. She asked if I wanted to come and say goodbye to the horse. When I arrived, my sister explained that the horse had developed a pyometra and was leaking discharge. She had been constantly wiping her with tissues. That one really unsettled me because the symbolism wasn't even vague. It was just oddly direct. Another dream involved a former friend's mother. She had terminal cancer, and I knew she was ill, but I wasn't close enough at that time to be receiving regular updates. One night, I dreamed I was standing around her hospital bed with her family while she blew out candles on a birthday cake. As soon as I woke up, I had this strong feeling that she had died, but I couldn't understand the birthday cake part. That morning, I messaged my friend and asked if her mom was okay. She replied that her mother was still alive, but she had been admitted to a hospice the night before. A few days later, she passed away. Afterwards, I found out her birthday had been 2 days after her death, and her family had celebrated it early at her bedside while she was still alive. It was exactly the scene I had seen in my dream. Those are just some of the bigger examples. I've also had smaller dreams that later came true. Little conversations, unexpected gifts, shops I end up visiting, random moments that seem completely ordinary, except I remember dreaming them before they happened. But there's one experience that affected me more than any dream ever has. I've never really shared it publicly, because I know a lot of people probably wouldn't believe it. And honestly, I still don't fully know what I believe about it myself. When I was 15, I became really close with a girl from school. I'll call her Alara. She was 14, and we clicked almost immediately. Within a week of becoming friends, we ended up skipping school together for most of the week and spending our days driving around with an older friend who had a car. One evening, we went to a charity shop and bought each other kites because we planned to fly them on the beach the next day. After that, we drove around for a while until both of us realized we needed the toilet. Our friend dropped us off along the promenade. On one side was the beach and the walkway, and on the other were houses, pubs, and little shops. As we walked along the seafront, we were both staring up at the sky because it was honestly beautiful that night. Then, out of nowhere, we heard an old woman's voice call out, "The toilets are over that way, girls." At first, we couldn't work out where the voice had come from. Then we saw her standing across the road. She was a very small, elderly woman, and there was something about her that felt unusual. Not exactly frightening, but unsettling. Like the air around her had gone still. We shouted thank you and carried on walking, laughing and asking each other how on earth she had known we were looking for the toilets. After we'd been, we came back outside and saw the same woman nearby. She smiled at us, so we asked her how she had known we needed the toilet. She just said, "I know lots of things." We laughed and asked if she was psychic. She replied, "Something like that." I was young and a bit bold, so I held out my hand and jokingly said, "Go on then, read my palm." She said she normally wouldn't do something like that there, but after a moment, she agreed. She read mine first and said things about my life that felt surprisingly accurate. Then she read Alara's. Partway through, her face changed. She suddenly looked hesitant, uncomfortable, like she had seen something she didn't want to say. I asked her what was wrong. She tried to brush it off and said she was finished, but I kept asking. Eventually, she looked at Alara and said, "You need to be careful. Your life is going to end suddenly." We both laughed nervously. We made some joke about needing to stop smoking so much, because what else do you do at that age when something terrifying gets dropped into the middle of the night? Not long after that, we headed back to the car. We both thought the whole thing had been strange and creepy, but as soon as I got into the car, I was hit with this overwhelming feeling that I needed to go home immediately. It wasn't just a normal thought. It felt like an alarm going off inside me. I tried to ignore it, but it got stronger and stronger until I asked our friend to take me home. I kept telling Alara she should come home too. She only lived a couple of minutes away from me, so it would have been easy. But she kept saying she wanted to stay out because she was having fun. I kept insisting. I don't even know how many times I asked her. While we were driving, our friend got a call from some mates asking to be picked up. There were 3 of them, and once I got out, there would only be one spare seat left. So he said he'd call them back after dropping me home. When we got to my house, I asked Alara one last time to come with me. She said no. We hugged. We said we'd see each other the next day to fly our kites. Then I went inside and went straight to bed. The next morning, I woke up to endless missed calls and messages asking if I was okay. Everyone knew I had been with her the night before because we'd posted photos and videos throughout the evening. I was confused and asked why everyone was checking on me. Someone told me to look at the news. That's when I found out that my best friend had been killed in a car accident. The car had been overcrowded and she had been thrown from the window. She died after I got dropped off. To this day, I don't think I've fully processed it. What has stayed with me all these years is the combination of everything that happened that night. The strange woman, the warning she gave, the sudden, overwhelming feeling that I had to go home, and the fact that I kept trying to get Alara to come with me. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. I genuinely don't know. All I know is that it's something I've never been able to explain, and I think I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. She was a beautiful soul. I still think about her often. I know there may be psychological explanations for some of what I've experienced, and I'm open to hearing them. I'm not trying to claim I have all the answers. But after so many moments like this, I can't help wondering what it all means. Maybe it's intuition. Maybe it's pattern recognition. Maybe it's grief giving shape to things. Maybe it's something spiritual that I'm not educated enough to understand yet. I don't know. But I'd really love to know if anyone else has experienced anything like this. So, something happened to me last night that I honestly still don't know how to explain. I've been sitting with it all day, trying to decide whether I should even talk about it, but I think I just need to say it out loud somewhere. Maybe someone else has experienced something like this. Maybe I just need to get it out of my head. I've always been sensitive to things I can't really explain. Spirits, energies, entities, whatever word makes the most sense to you. It started when I was little, and over time I learned to push it down because paying attention to it never seemed to help. When I met my husband, I found out he had his own experiences too. His were much scarier when he was young. Sleep paralysis, horrible night terrors, waking up afraid and not knowing why. He has always told me not to open myself up to that side of things. He believes acknowledging it gives it more room to come closer. Lately, though, his nightmares have started coming back. Some nights, he'll move around violently in his sleep. He doesn't hit me on purpose or anything like that, but he'll thrash, twist, sit up suddenly, and seem completely unlike himself. And because he's a big, strong man, it can be really frightening. The strangest part is that whenever it happens, I get this awful feeling that it isn't really about him. It feels like something is aiming for me through him, like he's asleep, unaware, and something else is pressing through that moment just enough to scare me. Whenever I turn on the light and wake him, he's confused. He never remembers anything. He'll look at me like he has no idea why I'm shaken. But last night was different. He sat up suddenly and turned toward me with this intense, angry energy. I can't even describe it properly. It didn't feel like him. I got out of bed right away and started speaking softly, trying to calm him down. I gave him some water, kept my voice gentle, and after a little while, he settled. I went into the bathroom for a minute because I needed to breathe. My hands were shaking. By the time I came back, he was completely asleep again, peaceful like nothing had happened. And I was angry. Not at him, never at him. I was angry that he was suffering like this. Angry that our nights kept being invaded by something I couldn't see, but could absolutely feel. So I did something I've never done before. I stopped shutting that part of myself down. I lay there and decided I was going to look for whatever was hanging around us. It felt like I drifted off, but not into normal sleep. It was more like I slipped into another layer of the room, or another layer of myself. I remember searching through dark little spaces, opening doors, pulling out drawers, checking corners, trying to find where this thing was hiding. Then I opened something. I don't know what it was exactly. A cabinet, maybe. A narrow door. And the second I did, I felt it. I didn't see anything. I never really see things clearly. I sense them. But behind that door, there was a wall with writing on it. I can't remember the words now, but in that moment, I knew what it meant. I had found it. And I said out loud, "Got you." The second I said that, I snapped awake. Not gently, not like waking up from a dream. I was jolted awake by the feeling that someone was standing right behind me. Then I heard it, a sharp, furious breath, like someone exhaling right into the room, angry that they'd been caught. The presence behind me felt so aggressive that my whole body froze. I was terrified. I mean, truly terrified. But somehow I turned around anyway and told it to get out. I told it it wasn't welcome here. I told it I wasn't afraid, even though I absolutely was. And then it was gone. Just like that, the heaviness lifted. But the rest of the night was awful. I had nightmare after nightmare, all of them built out of my worst fears. It felt targeted, like something was trying to punish me for looking. I don't know what I expected when I went searching. I don't know why I thought I could handle it. I just wanted to protect my husband. I wanted it to stop. Now I'm not sure I should have opened that door at all. I guess I'm sharing this because I don't want to feel alone with it. Has anyone else ever gone looking for something like this and actually found it?